Hello everyone, it's so great to see all of you here. Welcome to the NATO Youth Summit 2024. I'm Sarah Franzén.
And I'm called Johan Skoog, and we will be your Masters of Ceremony here in Stockholm. But today is about you, and how your contribution to peace and security is shaping the tomorrow we all share.
This is the 4th edition of the NATO Youth Summit. It's taking place on both sides of the Atlantic. We're starting in Europe, here in Stockholm, Sweden, and this afternoon we'll be moving on to Miami, Florida, in the United States.
And this year's event is very special. We're also marking the 75th anniversary of NATO. But also, it's very symbolic to have the summit here in Stockholm, as Sweden celebrates its entry into the military alliance.
This year, the NATO Youth Summit is the result of a unique collaboration between NATO, the Aspen Institute US, Aspen Institute Romania, the Swedish Defence University, and the Swedish Civil Contingency Agency.
So here in the room today, we have a select group of almost 200 people. I think we're a little bit less, but almost 200 people. We try to overbook a little bit, you know. But each and every one of you represent different sectors and institutions, and we're so glad to have you all here. We also have media representatives and a select group of content creators with us today.
And we're very pleased to have 10 winners of the NATO Youth Summit Challenge, and we'll hear from some of them later today. Last but not least, there are thousands more participants joining us online. Welcome.
Yeah, and you'll see that we have some exciting and interactive program with something for everyone in the Alliance and beyond. As mentioned, we have participants from all over around the world. So if you want to share your own thoughts on social media, please use the hashtag NATO Youth Summit. So hashtag NATO Youth Summit when you share this day with everyone else.
So get ready to get involved. During the session, during the sessions, you'll be invited to ask questions, participate in polls, and play games. In order to fully enjoy this and the interactive parts of the event today, and discover all our networking opportunities, now is the time to get out your phones. I don't see anyone getting out their phones.
Don't you guys have phones?
And open the WebEx Events app.
Well, if you don't already have it downloaded, you'll find a link to it in the email confirming your registration to today's event. Or you can search for WebEx Events in your App Store or Microsoft Store if you're an Android user. Once in the app, search for 2024 NATO Youth Summit and add the event. This will allow you to vote and contribute to the interactive activities conducted throughout the day.
Before we introduce our first session, let's run a quick poll using the app. Are you ready?
Yeah.
Come on, are you ready?
Come on. Interaction.
The question is, what do you see as the most pressing challenge to global security today?
So in order to vote, go to the polls function in the app and submit a response. And it should be that you can pick one of each selected answers. So again, what is the most pressing challenge to global security today? You can think about like your own experiences, your own hopes and fears. Is it disinformation, Russia's continued aggression, China's rise, climate change, weaponization of emerging and disruptive technologies, or maybe the erosion of democracy? Who knows? Sarah, what do you think?
Maybe disinformation?
Yeah. Oh, if you would ask me, I would think maybe Russia. I'm a natural Swede, so of course, you know, our history is not.
But I think we're getting some answers on the poll right behind us. What do you think?
Yeah, probably.
Well, let's have a look.
Yeah.
Well, disinformation.
Oh, yeah.
30% and military actions by Russia.
Want to keep it kind of even
Erosion of
here.
democracy. Wow.
I hope we didn't disinform you by Sarah picking disinformation. Also, the color seems to be like appropriate for your dress code.
Yeah.
And
Well,
disinformative. But yeah, now we would like to give the floor to the first set of speakers and co-host for the NATO Youth Summit here in Stockholm.
so let's welcome on stage Charlotte Petri-Gornicka, the Director General of the Civil Contingencies Agency, and Robert Egnell, the Vice Chancellor of the Swedish Defence University. Let's give them a warm applause.
Thank you so much for this opportunity, dear future leaders, or maybe why future? Dear leaders today and for the futures. And dear participants, my name is Charlotte Petri-Gornicka and I'm the Director General at the Swedish Civil Contingency Agency, in short, MSB. And this gentleman here, he will have to listen to me for 7 minutes before he's able to speak, so bear with him. So thank you again. And as a co-host of with the Swedish Defence University, NATO and Aspen Institute, it is truly an honor to open the 2024 NATO Youth Summit here in Stockholm. Whether you are watching at home, online, or in person here, you are so very welcome. I am a firm believer in including young leaders. And it's not just because Sweden is the youngest member of NATO. Could be the reason, but it's much more serious than that. For me, it's been something that's been guiding me through the whole of my working life, through Save the Children and UNICEF and other agencies that I have been fortunate enough to work with. Decision-making is about what's going to be lived with by many young people. And for that reason, your perspectives are so important to be included here and now. So a firm believer, and that's also why I'm so honored to have the opportunity to say welcome to this NATO Youth Seminar. These are serious times that we live in today, troubled times. Putin's stated ambition in his war aggression against Ukraine presents a dramatic challenge to Sweden and NATO's security, prosperity, and freedom. Our democracies and the international rules-based order are under attack. Each of us has a job to do in this situation. Each of us, whether it's through our studies, our work, or volunteering, each of us can contribute to strengthening NATO's collective defense. Each of us can preserve the peace and security of the alliance. And in this context, I want to highlight 3 perspectives. Firstly, a resilient, robust society is NATO's first line of defense, NATO's Article 3. For us at MSB, resilience is our starting point, increasing society's ability to withstand a crisis or armed attack. And we see this playing out every day in Ukraine. The people's resistance, willingness to defend their country, and ability to keep their society functioning in the midst of war. Resilient societies contribute to deterrence and defense. A resilient society is able to overcome and respond to adversity. A second perspective, total defense. In Sweden and among the Nordic countries, civil defense is the counterpart of military defense. Together, they make up total defense. And I believe that this total defense concept can make a valuable contribution to NATO. Total defense draws upon all of society's strengths, the public and private sector, armed forces, and civil society. Civil defense includes all non-military activities. Everything from convening national and local governments to food supply, communications, healthcare and emergency services. It ensures functioning of vital services during crisis or war. All of this that we see happening in Ukraine. In Sweden, we are currently making historic investments in our total defense. My third and final point is actually to reiterate what I said earlier. It is an important point, and it is about you. Every individual can contribute to NATO's collective deterrence and defense. We all have a role to play in making our societies more resilient. We all can contribute. It begins at home, with our family, our friends and neighbors. It continues in the classroom or at work, or as a student, as employees or employers or entrepreneurs. And it can continue in our free time through volunteering. In 2018, just 2 years before the pandemic, MSB sent out an educational brochure to all households in Sweden. If crisis or war comes, maybe you didn't see it because you don't read brochures. My younger friend here, he has obviously an iPad, so. But the thing is, joke aside, this brochure was read by almost everyone and very appreciated because it was possible to kind of save. And the message of sending it through the old-fashioned post office to every household was actually a signal that this is important. It can be downloaded, so just so you know. And the brochure describes how to be prepared for extreme situations, such as weather, cyber attacks, or worst case, a military conflict. Everyone living in Sweden has a responsibility towards one another, and ultimately, the country's security. If you are well informed and prepared, you can take action and you can help others. The brochure is being revised as we speak, and later this year in the fall, it's going to be, a new version, taking its kind of point of departure in the society we live in today, which is more complex and perhaps a situation that has deteriorated. And again, it's a brochure, but we will use other channels as well. Nationally, MSB will continue to bolster Sweden's civil preparedness and integrating our work in NATO processes. Because in the end, it is our common efforts that defines our society's ability to resist in times of crisis or war. In these troubled times we live in, we need to reaffirm the opening lines of the Washington Treaty. To unite our efforts for collective defense and for the preservation of peace and security. To safeguard the freedom, principles of democracy, individual liberty, and the rule of law. We do this together because it makes us stronger. With this, I'd like to once again welcome you to the NATO Youth Summit in Stockholm, and now give the word to Robert Egnell, Vice Chancellor, Swedish Defence University. Please, Robert, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Charlotte, and what an honor. What an honor it is to share the stage with you and to be able to say welcome to all of you. This is going to be an incredibly inspiring day, I'm sure. And it is a special summit, as you highlighted already, not only because there's one, or even we could say two brand new members in Finland and Sweden, but also this alliance has been steadfast for 3/4 of a century. I think historians would call that remarkable, because most alliances vanish quite quickly, and especially in the face of war and threats. So this is quite an achievement for us to stand here for this celebration. 3/4 of a century, that gives us a pause to reflect on that past, but also to look to the future. But for us in Sweden, it's so new. It's more about thinking about what does this actually mean? What does it mean for a country to have signed the Washington Treaty and to be an ally? What does it mean for us individually, and how should we react? Does it feel different? It does feel a little different when we meet international colleagues already, I can tell you. And inside it also feels a bit different. And I can go 2 years back in time, because that's when I think I started this internal journey for me in a very serious way. I was in Hamburg for what was then the 51st Conference of Commandants of NATO. That's when all the vice chancellors, presidents, or commandants, as we're called in military lingo, meet and share notes, talk about current challenges, future, education of especially officers, of course. And on the very day that conference started, Sweden and Finland submitted the formal applications in Brussels to become NATO members. And these conferences always start with an icebreaker. So as Mika, my Finnish colleague, and I entered the room together by chance, there was an eruption of applause and welcoming as we entered that room. I'd say much to my surprise, and it wasn't just an applause, it was quite literally a huge embrace by everyone in the room. And when you're hugged by a room full of 2-star generals, you know that something special is happening, right? So you feel very safe. So what did I learn that day? Well, that this is not just an alliance based on mutual security interests and collective defense. This is an alliance that was very much funded, as Charlotte also highlighted, on very strong principles for that collective defense. It's about something much more. It's about mutual recognition of friendship, of doing this together. And as all of these people in the room highlighted, it was not about congratulations to you and Finland for starting the membership process. It was more of a gratulation to all of us, because this will strengthen the alliance and our collective security. So that highlighted that mutual sense of creating security and defense together as an alliance. It's much more than just a signatory approach to and mutual defense interests. The warmth of the embrace of my colleagues highlighted this fact very clearly. And as it happens, 2 days ago, I came home from Washington, D.C., where the 53rd Conference of Commandants was taking place. Again, of course, that was the first time we participated as full members. How was that different? Well, first of all, there was a whole day for members only I had no idea about, since I had only been there as a partner before. So it opened a number of doors. That's something they highlighted at the embassy as well, that we are received somewhat differently these days as a full member of the alliance. But rather than speaking about the Swedish membership and our identity, it's perhaps interesting to talk about what we, and I'd say mostly old men in that conference, were talking about, because we were talking about you. We were talking about the current challenges we're facing, obviously, the increasingly complex context of differing threats. And it's not just Russia's horrible invasion of Ukraine and China's behavior in the Pacific. Those are the traditional security threats. We're also witnessing everything from cyber warfare to climate change, from terrorism to disinformation campaigns, from extreme poverty to pandemics. There's no shortage of mutual challenges out there on this 75th anniversary of NATO. So we need to think about how that affects us all. We obviously talked a lot about the current disruptive and emerging technologies, how that will impact us, but especially how can we train the future leaders to be effective in this environment? What do they need to know? And it's not just about taking a course in technology. What we realized, all of us, is that we need to create very flexible minds, adaptive thinkers, critical mindsets that can learn, unlearn, and relearn constantly throughout their careers to adapt to a changing environment. And that is quite a challenge for us, but something we are embracing. As we face these challenges, I'd like to emphasize a few quite important points. The first one is, as an alliance, we must reaffirm our commitment to collective defense. That's the very heart of this alliance, obviously. But what does that mean in an era of hybrid warfare, of unconventional threats and disinformation? And we must really remain vigilant in the face of these emerging challenges and how we think about collective defense in this era so that we remain vigilant. Secondly, we must also recognize the importance of NATO's role in promoting stability and security beyond our borders through peacekeeping, conflict preservation, and capacity building around the world. As we look to the future, the Partnership for Peace program is hugely important. Sweden has been a beneficiary of it for decades, and now it's our turn to contribute as a member to that program. We also need to address the root causes of conflict. We need to promote diplomacy, development, good governance. This is also something we have to work not only through the through NATO, obviously, but also through the European Union and the United Nations. Thirdly, we really must think hard about new and disruptive technologies and how to harness that to our advantage and not just think defensively. It's everything from artificial intelligence to quantum computing, from space-based assets to unmanned systems. This is a technological revolution that will probably transform our societies in ways we are only beginning to see the outlines of at the moment. So that's something we need to think very hard about. And finally, we must recognize that NATO's strength doesn't just lie in its military power, but in that warm embrace I felt in the room in Hamburg 2 years ago. It's in our values and it's in our ideals as well. So as an alliance of democracies, we must remain steadfast in our commitment to upholding human rights, promoting democracy and defending the rule of law. In this age of authoritarian resurgence and democratic backsliding, NATO must serve as a bulwark against tyranny and oppression, standing up for freedom and justice wherever they are threatened. In conclusion, I'm sorry or happy to say that this will be the challenges of your future. But I'm delighted that we are here today discussing all of these things together and how we can make a contribution individually as a country, but most importantly as an alliance. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Robert Egnell and Charlotte Petri-Gornitska, for your warm welcome and sharing your thoughts and expertise. A few weeks ago, before today's event, we challenged youth ages 18 to 35 from across the Alliance and beyond to tell us about how they see their role in shaping a secure tomorrow. My colleague, Johan Skoog, is now on stage with the 3 best Youth Summit Challenge winners to discuss their ideas and proposals on how youth can take a more proactive role in collective security. Let's give them a warm applause.
Thank you, Sarah, and thank you, everyone. And also thank you, Charlotte and Robert, for your previous remarks. I think this will be a good bridge to like how the young generation can help with just finding out about these new technologies and innovations that might help us secure a better future. So here, together with me on stage, we have 3 of the winners of the Cyber Challenge. So the win was also to get a sponsored seat to get here, but also the ability to present your given ideas. So warm welcome. To my left, I have Marie Magdalena from Czech Republic. We have Dario from Portugal, and we have Jana from Ukraine. So give them a round of applause. Through this contest, we had very, very many contributions, which were all superb, but here are some of them that stood out the most. So you will hear about them quite shortly. But huge thanks to everyone that contributed with their given ideas. And just, it's just so nice to see these young, innovative thoughts and ideas that's been around trying to, find solutions for how to make the world a better place, basically. So thank you all, and thank you to you especially. So I think we'll start with, I want each and every one of you to share your contribution and your submission to the contest. And I would like to start with you, Maria Magdalena. Bradvova is your last name as well, might add that as well. So you come from Czech Republic, but please tell us a little bit about yourself and your contribution to the contest.
Of course. So good morning, everyone. It's great to be here. Thank you so much to NATO, the Aspen Institute, and all the organizers for putting this wonderful event together. So yeah, I'm Mary Magdalena Bradova. I come from the Czech Republic originally. I live in London now. I study war studies at King's College in London. But yeah, so about my proposal, my contribution to the competition. I think that disinformation, as we've just seen in Europol, has become one of the biggest threats that the Alliance currently faces, especially since the end of the Cold War era. The threat landscape has just changed immensely. And so currently both malicious state and non-state actors can harness technology incredibly inexpensively, usage of the so-called troll farms or generative AI to create content which is highly destabilizing, but also altered right to the audience and targeted. And so I think we need to shape or help the young generation that is growing up completely online to kind of help them navigate this space. And we should do this in a fun way, in a gamified way, where they want to voluntarily engage. And so my proposal is an app-based platform. This app would primarily host an annual challenge called the NATO Challenge, which would last 30 days. It would always start on the 4th of April to commemorate the North Atlantic signing treaty. And so the users would be greeted by an avatar of a NATO soldier. It would be a soldier from their country, so they immediately feel a part of the alliance. And over the course of the 30 days, the soldier would navigate them through the game, but also he would meet, or they would meet fellow soldiers, as you can see, to kind of teach them about the other member states, so they feel a part of this bigger community. The games that would be in the challenge, every day a mini game would appear, sort of like a Duolingo almost. You get your alert every day, and the games would be twofold. One category would be to kind of get users the ability to identify disinformation. It would be looking at real or fake profiles, bot comments, how to spot generative AI images, and the other part of the game would be purely entertainment. It would be battleship, it would be flight simulators with NATO equipment, of course. But basically, the app would give the users a toolkit both to identify disinformation, but also to learn more about NATO. I think the uptake should be popularized in schools, but also by influencer marketing. There should also be incentive for the users to follow up through the whole 30 days. So there should be a prize draw at the end for some prizes. I think technology would be the best, so they can use their newfound skills. And yeah, the app would be available in all member state languages, and so it would have the same benefits no matter the budget or the size of the country. So I think it is a future-oriented concept, and it echoes the kind of layered resilience concept that NATO has, where it really is about civil empowerment and civil education. And lastly, the app would be dormant for the rest of the year because it would only run for the 30 days. But in case of emergency, the Lions could use the app to send alerts, emergencies, where to find shelter, contact people. And so it has both a civil education, but also a safety aspect.
Well, that sounds amazing, and I'm sure that the general director is taking notes full hand here, because the target audience that you try to reach out to with such an app is someone who gets a lot of information, but it could be hard to facilitate, is this true or not, but to integrate that into a military structure and civilian structure as well, part with NATO. I think that sounds very interesting. So thank you so much for your contribution and your presentation of it.
Thank you.
But moving on to our second person. Yeah.
Thank you.
Super nice, right?
Thank you.
Moving on to Dario Pedro from Portugal. Also 75 year member, right? You were one of the founding states of NATO. So congrats to you as well for that. But Dario contributed. If you can start to explain a little bit, and we will also showcase, because you had a video that we'll play, but we can first hear some of your introductory words, please.
Okay, thank you very much, and thank you the organizers and NATO for the invitation. It's for me an honor to speak here. So to give a little bit of background, so I did my PhD in AI for drones, and we were initially working in a company as a managing director to the civilian sector. But due to the full-scale invasion of Ukraine, we were requested by our Ministry of Defense to also start looking at the defense sector. And nowadays, Beyond Vision, the company I work in, develops technology end-to-end from mechanics, aerospace engineering, electronics, up to the cloud and AI algorithms, all in the drones and UAVs and autonomous vehicles ecosystem. And the video showcase slightly that, and then I can highlight a few points on there.
Mm-hmm. Maybe we can play the video then, and we can get back to you after that. So please, let's play the video.
Innovation isn't just about creating new technology. It's about revolutionizing how we solve complex defense challenges. At Beyond Vision, we're doing exactly that with our advanced UAV technology.
Based in Lisbon, our team is pioneering the integration of AI in UAVs, focusing on enhancing military capabilities, offering unparalleled threat detection, response efficiency, and surveillance capabilities. Our UAVs are equipped with custom electronics developed by Beyond Vision, enabling various AI algorithms. This includes pre-established modules for asset detection, tracking, and cataloging, as well as open innovation modules like a 3-stage multi-net algorithm designed for dynamic collision avoidance. By integrating CNNs, RNNs, and decision networks, we harness the image features, gather temporal insights, and make real-time decisions. Operational testing in NATO exercises such as REPUS proves our technology readiness and viability for deployment.
Beyond military applications, our technology has vast potential in civilian sectors, from agriculture to infrastructure monitoring, demonstrating strong commercial viability, which aligns with XTech international goals. Our vision extends beyond current capabilities, aiming to redefine UAV technology in defense and civilian sectors alike.
This submission reflects our deep understanding of European Defence Agency needs, underscored by a clear, concise presentation of our technology's benefits.
Let us join you on this journey. Together, we can shape a future where innovation meets strategy, and advanced UAV technology not only protects nations, but also preserves peace and enhances global security.
Very nice.
Thank you very much.
An applause for that. But Dario, please continue, elaborate a little bit what we just saw.
Yeah, so the defense sector is definitely a harsh place to navigate. Usually we have stream-long procurements, but the technology is evolving at a very, very fast pace. For if you think a little bit, which was the phone that you were using 10 years ago, that's roughly the time that some procurements take on the defense sector. And in 10 years, for the unmanned systems, the technology evolves quite a lot. And our technology is trying to navigate that market. We developed initially to the civil sector, which allow us to develop technology that's easier to use and easier to penetrate the market. And in that way, we don't have such large cycles of training, of maintenance as well, because they are equipments that are made in a way that they are easy to use. But also, we cannot forget the specialities of the defense sector. So, for example, the cyber component of it is of extreme importance to us. Luckily, we were in European research projects where, with some European partners, we definitely worked that part and managed to evolve it. But when you're doing operations, those are on the military sector, those are points that you need to have extreme attention to. Also, the sourcing of the components, you need to make sure they're all from reliable sources, and then you're not leaving any gap or loopholes in between the procurement and the final operations. Just as a final note, I think the Diano program also helps us quite a lot, because it allows us to quickly showcase to NATO partners, and it speed up the integration on NATO armed forces operations. And I think with the new joiners, and that's also something that will have quite soon.
Yeah, I'm sure there's going to be a very large amount of interest into these given ideas, and also the integration in the civilian infrastructure, but also that you were already doing some exercises with NATO. That's pretty exciting. But thank you so much, Dario.
Thank you.
And another applause. And lastly, we have Jana Rudenko coming from Ukraine, but you study in Holland at Leiden University as well. So please, if you can introduce yourself and also your submission.
Thank you so much. During the first days of April 2022, when there were news about Bucha liberation and the whole world witnessed Bucha massacre, I'm sure that all of you saw that news. As a person that was under the Russian occupation in Bucha, I had the biggest fear in that moment, bigger than I had during being in Bucha or during the evacuation when I saw Russian soldiers. My biggest fear was that the world again will believe Russia. Because there was a wave of, because we see already, we have the history of the world believing Russia only, and there was a wave of misinformation. That's why I agree that a project of Maria Magdalena is right to do. What I did, as a person who saw war crimes, who saw, I'm sorry to mention it, but dead bodies on streets of civilians, I was writing myself, because I don't trust Western media, I don't trust and I cannot rely to be sure that they will portray what was happening in the right way. Because how we started from crisis in Ukraine. When we don't call events by right names, as crisis in Ukraine, we don't see the reality, we don't see the real picture. And it is Russia's invasion of Ukraine. There is clear responsibility and accountability and the fault. Be your own media. It is my advice after 2.5 years of full-scale invasion. Then I started writing a lot on LinkedIn, sharing my personal story. Very important, share history of Ukraine and relations, because for me was the main point to prove is that Ukraine didn't just appear in 2022, Ukraine didn't appear in 2014, and neither in in 1991, Ukraine was always there, but you just didn't know about it. Another part that when I already entered university, Leiden University, and I thought that, you know, during the war, everything that I truly own, it is my knowledge and my experience. That's why my right choice was to enter university and study more. In Leiden University, being there a few months for pre-master, there was no events about Ukraine. Nothing about the largest war in Europe since World War II. That's why I co-founded a student association called ABBA. ABBA, not a Swedish group, although I like, you know, money. I will be using it during fundraising. But it stands for Adriatic, Baltic, Black, Azov Sea, and it kind of represents Eastern Europe, and we collectively show our history, culture, and experience with Russia, because there is big gap between Western Europe and Eastern Europe, and we vividly see it especially during the Russia's full-scale invasion. So it is my two projects, my own LinkedIn and my student association. But what can we say about Ukrainian youth in Ukraine? Everyone is mobilized, and it is something that I would like to advise you to learn, and better to learn from us, but not by your own experience. It is that we are all, as civil society, mobilized. But what we are doing? First of all, we are fundraising all the time. We are fundraising for drones, for vehicles, for our soldiers, because our defenders is our brothers, fathers, sons, all the relatives. Fundraising. The second, it is that we are learning tactical medical training. We are taking course, because we do need to know if the bomb hits my building, how I can help myself. And you need to have tourniquets all the time with you. The third one, it is who doesn't know, we try to learn how to drive vehicles. We are going to shooting courses, how to handle firearms. We are donating blood, because there is scarcity of blood. You can also do it in your own country. And we are assembling drones ourselves. And it leads me to another project that I'm doing. We saw our friends making drones, assembling drones themselves in Ukraine. And we thought, oh, like our friends are doing that in Ukraine. Why we cannot do it ourselves from anywhere we are, from everywhere? In the Netherlands right now, I'm one of the co-founders of Drone Aid Collective. It is a social initiative where we are organizing drone building workshops for Ukrainian veterans that are undergoing rehabilitation in the Netherlands. So, and it makes the lasting impact, because we need to empower Ukrainian veterans to, after, like they are the bravest men that were protecting my country, and now they cannot contribute because they don't have a leg, or both, or like they are wounded. But with such workshops, we empower them to contribute further. We are developing their professional skills, and who knows, maybe they will build big drones after. And so it is. So it is my 3 projects that I'm working right now. And to say the last, as a Ukrainian, I pray that one day we'll join NATO, because it's about unity, and only united we can be strong.
Thank you, Johan. Powerful remark, powerful reminder that the invasion is still ongoing. We need to do everything we can in order to stop it. But with that, I would like to thank each and every one of you. Thank you for your contribution, submission, and I hope you will get a nice time here at the NATO Youth Summit and discuss your ideas further with your colleagues here. But then we are finished, and thank you again. Another round of applause, please.
Thank you.
Thank you, Carl Johan, for facilitating this conversation. And thanks to our Youth Summit winners for sharing their vision for the future on stage. Let's give them another round of applause. We are now diving into the headline session of our event here in Stockholm, our discussion with the chair of NATO's Military Committee, Admiral Rob Bauer. I will now give the floor to Federica Mangiamelli to moderate this conversation touching on defense, deterrence, and resilience.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Good morning, everyone.
Hello.
Good morning, Admiral Bauer.
Hello.
So, before we start, a couple of housekeeping rules. We want to make this session as interactive as possible, so I highly encourage the audience in the room and people watching us online to prepare your questions, because you will have the chance to ask your questions directly to Admiral Bauer. Now, with no further ado, I would like to start this conversation. Our chat today will unfold around 3 different pillars: resilience, defense, and deterrence. And I'd like to start with resilience. We've seen the opening remarks of the Director General of MSB. She was mentioning some great work that Sweden is doing in trying to build in societal resilience. And this led me to an anecdote, because at the beginning of the year, your remark, "Europe must be ready for war," caused quite a reaction. There were young people that took over social media, and they were expressing their fear and confusion, underlying how we are not ready for a war scenario. Now, I understand that not all the countries of the alliance are like Sweden, but you are the NATO Youth Summit. You have the chance to address young people from across the alliance. Have you got a special message? And I'd like to ask you, what can we do in our daily life to build societal resilience?
First of all, good morning to all of you. My remarks in January were not to scare people, but to prepare people. And I think that is the message in general. For the young generation that is basically present here at the Youth Summit, I think this generation in many ways is more resilient than they think, because COVID hit this generation in a way that nobody expected at the time. And that basically had a huge impact in the lives of a lot of people, young people as well, people that were trying to study, people that were trying to play, people that were trying to go to festivals, or all the things that people like to do or have to do. And that was seriously interrupted by, in this case, a pandemic. And that's part of my motto, which is expect the unexpected. And so this discussion on war was for many, and maybe for still too many, a discussion that is sort of a faraway thing. It is something that will not happen to us, because we live in Sweden, far away from all the troubles in the world, but also in the Netherlands or other parts of the alliance. And there is parts in the alliance that is closer to Russia, or, as we just heard, if you live in Ukraine, then you know what war is. It's not a crisis, it's a war. And so, therefore, people have to understand that it's not a faraway thing. War is back in Europe. That's why I try to explain that we have to become more resilient as a society, not only the military, because as a society we play a role in being ready. And the readier we are, as they say, you know, if you want peace, prepare for war. And therefore, the things I said, I basically have said for 1.5 years already. But in a way, it was, emphasized by a number of things that were said by President Macron, who talked about war economy. It was the German minister who talked about the kriegstüchtig, and it was the Swedish Chief of Defence who said we have to be ready for war. And so suddenly there was a critical mass, and therefore it went viral. But in many ways, I said what I said for the last 1.5 years. But I honestly think that we all play a role. And the young lady from Ukraine that I just heard gave some great examples if it comes to how we make sure that there is a service after service for the Ukrainian wounded soldiers that now help to build drones and therefore have a new purpose again. It is about making sure that our society understands, as I see in Sweden or in the Scandinavian navies more than in many other navies, is that when I talked about simple things like have water in-house for 36 hours, have batteries for your radio and for your flashlight, is not a new thing in the Scandinavian nations, because there could be a power outage. And it's not only about war, it's also about a natural disaster, or there's a power outage. And we now live almost in a society where we do not accept any failures, where we do not accept any risk. And things can go wrong. It's not something new per se, but we have lived in a sort of perfect society for so long that we hardly accept that there is a disturbance. And so there's a lot of things that people can do. Last week I was in London for a CEO conference, and they asked me for examples. And it was interesting because just before me, the CEO of IKEA had spoken. And he said, when the war started, we found out that we were confronted with the fact that 25% of the wood that we use in IKEA came from Russia. And therefore, basically, overnight, we had to change that because we didn't want to buy our wood in Russia anymore. And that is the way industry has to prepare. It is about energy. It is about raw materials. It is about food. All these things can and have been and will be used as a weapon by Russia. We didn't have a contract with Gazprom for oil and gas. We had a contract with Putin. And when he decided to tell Gazprom to switch off the valve, they did. That was not in the contract. So we have to understand that all the things that we thought, if you have a business contract amongst nations, we will never have war again. It's not true. And we see the same with China, where there's a lot of dependencies on China with regard to the raw materials for medicine. 75% in the hands of China. 95% of the raw materials for renewable energy is in the hands of China. So we all have to understand that this will have an impact in our future. And as your future is probably longer than my future, you will have to deal with this for longer. And therefore, we have to, if you sort of think about these things, dare to think about these things, that is part of resilience as well. If you dare to think the unthinkable, then there's less surprises when it happens. And I think that is, you went through the pandemic already, so in a way you are more resilient than you think. But there is many things that we can do, where we can help our society to become stronger.
Thank you very much, Admiral. I think we have a lot to learn from our friends in Ukraine, and I have to say from what I've heard also from our friends in Sweden of doing so much to raising awareness of such a complex challenge. I'd like to move to deterrence and defense because we have short time. We are approaching the NATO summit in Washington, and I believe we should do a early review. The summit in Lithuania was an historical summit. There were so many important agreements that the allies agreed upon, increasing defense spending, ramping up the production. We will come back later on the ramping up the production of military capabilities, but I'd like to ask your opinion on, have you seen a positive progression in this past almost 12 months? And what are possible speed bumps that are actually hindering the process?
There's two things basically happening at the same time. So after Vilnius, we are now looking at how can we make sure that all the decisions that the leaders took in Vilnius are going to happen, that we make sure that these plans are executable, that we get more military men and women, that they have a higher readiness, that we buy more capabilities that we need to be readier, that we're going to do more exercises against those new plans, that we make sure that changes in command and control are there. So there's a lot of things to do to make sure that it will work as we planned, as we have planned. And that means a lot of investments, it means a lot of recruitment, it means retaining people, it means maybe thinking about conscription or reservists or mobilization. So there's a lot of things that is beyond the influence of the Ministry of Defense. It's a wider political discussion on what it means for a nation to be readier for deterring and defending against the two threats that we're facing, which is Russia and the terrorist groups. So that's where societal resilience comes into play and where we have to do a lot of work. It's about military mobility to make sure that the things that come from the US and Canada enter in a harbor and then that we're able to transport them over roads and over through air, and that there's less restrictions when we try to cross a border, and all these things we talk about for 7, 8, 9 years now in EU and NATO. There's a lot of talk, but there's not enough walk because there's still a lot of restrictions. So all these things is beyond the military, is beyond the Ministry of Defense. And I think slowly, in my eyes sometimes too slowly, there is the realization that we need to do this together, and not that you only look at the Minister of Defense and the Chief of Defense and then say, why is it not happening? Because it's beyond their reach, beyond their power. So I think slowly that is a realization is growing, but it's also about the defense capacity, as you said, and we're going to talk later about that. But all these things have an impact on what we need to achieve. So that's one. On the other side, there is the support for Ukraine that needs to continue. And to tell, I see you there with the Ukrainian lady. I said it in Ukraine when I visited there in March in Kiev, and I said it. I will say it now again. The yellow and the blue flag that Sweden has, of course, now in front of the NATO headquarters will not be the only blue and yellow flag in front of the NATO headquarters. And the support for Ukraine is essential because they don't lack courage, they lack ammunition and weapons. And they won't be, they cannot fire promises at the Russians. So all the nations that promise things have to deliver on air defense, on artillery, grenades, and all the things that Ukraine need. It is in our own interest. You know, Ukraine is in many ways defending not only themselves, but our freedom as well. And therefore we need to continue to support them. Slowly there is now an uptick in the help again, the 60 billion package from the US. There's more promises from the UK, from the Netherlands, from other nations. So that's good. And I think, but in the end, for them, the only thing that counts is if you're in the trenches and if you are at your artillery gun, that you look next to you and that there's a pile of artillery grenades. Not a pile of promises. You need grenades. And for them, that is what they need now. That is what I will tell the Chiefs of Defense on Thursday when I meet with them in Brussels. And therefore, that is going on at the same time. Now, to do these things at the same time requires our industry to ramp up in a way that they're unable to do. And the reason for that is because the last 30 years, we have an economy that is based on just in time, just enough. And it means that if you order your car today, they will produce it after you ordered it. And it's great because they can plan everything that all the orders of the customers, they can plan that against the capacity that they have. So you will use your capacity to the max. That is what they do. And you will not have stocks because stocks are stupid, because it's dead money. And we know from the pandemic and from a war that in the health industry and in the armed forces, it's not enough. just in time, just enough. It's too late and it's too little. So you need to be able to handle peak demand signals, and that is not possible at the moment. And so that's one of the things we have to work hard on as well. So the fact that it is happening parallel, making ourselves stronger and making sure that Ukraine is able to win this war. And it's not too late. There was a delay in all these deliveries, and it's very difficult at the front in Ukraine, but it's not too late. People have to realize that. When General Zaluzhny visited the NATO headquarters in January 2022, that was just before the war began, he told the chiefs of defense, the people in Ukraine, especially the young generation, will not accept Russian rule in Ukraine. And they have shown that. They have shown that through a remarkable courage and perseverance. And therefore, I'm sure if we help them, they will be able not only to stay in the fight, but to win. And they have done remarkable things. I mean, they have regained 50% of what the Russians took initially. They have, without a navy, pushed the Russian navy back to the other side of the Crimea. And as a result, they now have the grain corridor that is from Odessa past Romania, Bulgaria, Turkey into the Straits, without a deal with Russia. They are targeting Russian logistic targets deep into Russia. There's 350,000 dead Russians and wounded Russians. So it's not going well with Russia at all. None of the Russian strategic objectives have been met, have been achieved. And we are now in day, 806 or 7 or 9 in this war. And so it's a remarkable achievement by the Ukrainian people. And it's not only the soldiers, it's the people. As she rightly said, this is a whole of society event, and war is. And I think we have to relearn that as well.
I have 2 follow-up questions, because I would like to touch upon Ukraine for sure, but also about the European Union that you mentioned when it comes to bolstering the industrial capacity of our continent. We've seen an inverse tendency lately. We've seen the European institution claiming defense as a strategic objective finally. We've seen several initiatives flourishing, and we've seen, like, for instance, the initiative to provide ammunition to Ukraine, or we've seen the attempt to identify an adequate strategy to bolster our production capacity. But as Mr. Borrell once said, I think it was 2023, a stronger European Union is a stronger NATO. And I'm not sure you necessarily agree with this statement, but we know for sure that a stronger European Union cannot exist without a strong cooperation and coordination with NATO. So if we see this relation and we see the possibility of having mutual advantages, how can we better synchronize and complement these efforts, and in order to increase the production and guarantee the security of demand that right now European companies, but defense companies in general, really need?
Yeah. I think the months after the start of the war, and that's the full-fledged war in Ukraine, because the war started 10 years ago in 2014, that period when the EU did what they are strong at, and NATO did what it's strong at, then the synergetic effect of those 2 organizations were remarkable. And I think it surprised us, but it also surprised the Russians, and it surprised the Chinese. So I think that is a moment where we stop talking about strategic autonomy and things that are sort of about a competition between NATO and EU. Because strategic autonomy sort of gives the impression that Europe can do without the US, and I don't believe that. The US needs Europe because we're the biggest trade partner of the US, and Europe needs the US. There's 100,000 American soldiers in Europe at the moment. If you combine the armies of the larger nations in Europe, you hardly get there. So we have to understand we need the US, and I don't know whether there will be a question about President Trump to be or not to be. I'm not that worried, and I think the US as a country has a great interest in NATO, in Europe, but we need to make sure that the nations invest enough in their own armed forces. That is the biggest point of critique. And so, to the industry. I think Europe has a great role to play when it comes to the defense industry, because it's not the core business of NATO to organize the industry. I'm talking more and more about industry because I think it's necessary, and the fact that I do means that it's not enough what is happening. Otherwise, I would have stopped talking about it. But the one problem that I still see is that there is still this, how do you say, dual tracks almost. Like, if it is our intention to help Ukraine, which I think is the intention of the 1 million grenades, then I think it shouldn't matter where the grenades come from. They don't necessarily have to come from Europe, because Ukraine needs grenades now. They don't need necessarily European grenades. They need grenades. Whether they come from South Korea or from South Africa or from Brazil, they don't care. As long as they fit into the guns, that is important. But but it's still then in this 1 million grenade project, there is still this discussion that it has to be a European company that has to produce it. And I understand that if you want to invest in European defense industry, that you expect European nations to buy there. So I'm not against that idea, but let's make that a longer term project. And then the immediate urgent problem is Ukraine, and then fix that with whatever means and with whatever producers. But they have been mixed. And that is something that I find difficult to understand, because it's not helping Ukraine as it should, not with the speed as they need it. So that is the sort of competition that is unfortunately still there. So yeah, I think they play an essential role. And I think we should focus first and foremost on making sure Ukraine wins this war, and then at the same time or parallel strengthen the European industry.
Thank you. You already mentioned it again, the issue of the challenge of providing military equipment to Ukraine. That has been one of the most discussed topics since the beginning of the war. And in this delicate phase of the war, it is even more. You also mentioned the aid that was approved by the United States, 60 billion euros. I want to ask you, because this is often a factor overlooked, and I think you're the perfect person to explain this to all of us, the issue of interoperability. Ukraine gets equipment from various countries, and different specific equipments have different features, require different trainings, and sometimes also specific maintenance, spare parts, and all other factors part of the logistic tail. Now my question is, I know NATO has been working closely with Ukraine, training them to use different type of equipment, but when we have to maximize the time and increase operational efficiency, how can we achieve more interoperability on the battlefield?
Again, these are parallel things, because I mean, we have exported fragmentation. In Europe, we produce about 172 different weapon systems. And I mean, multiple fighter aircraft, multiple tanks, multiple frigates, multiple submarines, multiple tanks. So in the US, it's 35 different weapon systems. So we are building, with a much lower budget than the US, we build much more different weapon systems. And that means lower production numbers, which makes it in itself, of course, more expensive. And we have exported that, basically, not exported truly, but I mean, given away a lot of these weapon systems. And so we have exported fragmentation and into the Ukrainian armed forces, which of course is a nightmare. If you are now in the logistics department of the Ukrainian Air Force, it's unbelievable what they have to, how they have to make sure that all these different weapon systems have ammunition, have maintenance, all the different spare parts, all the different experience and expertise to make sure that it works. So it's an amazing achievement, and they do it. And of course, they would prefer to make it much easier. But but for now, having the weapon systems is more important than having more interoperability. But the day after the war, they have to decide which weapon systems we're going to keep and which weapon systems we're doing away with, because this is a nightmare. It's expensive, and it's too cumbersome and all these things. So for now, they deal with it, because having the weapon systems, even if it's too many different sorts, is better than to have no weapon system. So that is the practical problem. How come we build still so many different weapon systems? Because there is still too much national interest involved. Because if you talk to politicians in European nations, they say, yeah, it's very important that we make sure that there's interoperability and even interchangeability. They have now learned a new word, which actually means that you can, if you have a grenade, 155 millimeter grenade. The non-experts in the room probably said, well, if you have a grenade, then it fits into a 155 millimeter gun. But that's not true, because the manufacturers have made sure that the grenade that they make only fits in their gun, either by software or by a hardware thingy that makes and it doesn't fit in another gun. So if you are in Ukraine, you get a box of grenades. You have to look, does it fit or you have to make sure that it goes to the gun where these grenades fit in. And there are 16 different types of 155 millimeter grenades in NATO. 16 different types. And we have agreed since 1968 that we will standardize this. And the last update is from, I think, 2012. And in that document, it says that, and 14 nations in a footnote say in that document that they have the right to deviate from the standards. That's interesting, isn't it? So we all are in favor of something that is not too difficult to understand, interoperability. But when it comes to, shall we make this and turn this into practice, then national industry policies, national industry interests prevail, unfortunately. Now, in a time when there was a low production and low series, I sort of understand, because it's like your printer. You know, the printers are not too expensive nowadays. It's the ink where they earn the money with. And it's the same with artillery grenades and guns. So therefore, I understand if you have low series and low numbers, but now there is big numbers. So if we use the STANAG, the standardization agreements, and we're going to build the same, then actually you can make sure we can go to joint procurement, buy things together, then you have larger orders, and then the industry has the long-term demand signals they are asking for. And then hopefully this increase in the defense production will happen faster, because private investors are willing to invest in the defense industry. So I think it is extremely important. But again, there's a lot of talk, but there should be more walk.
Thank you. Before I go to my last question, I would like to remind the audience in the room and online that we will open the floor for Q&As shortly. I want to ask you, my last question would be about Sweden. Sweden is the latest country who joined the alliance, and
terrible.
It's latest, and their military power is undeniable. And I want you to maybe if you could tell us more at what are the upgrades that the alliance felt after a country like Sweden joined the alliance.
I would say relief. That is what we all felt. We felt finally. Those are the two words I would say. But and extremely happy. So I think Finland and Sweden are a great add-on to the alliance, because Of course, we have much more to defend. It's a lot of territory to look after together, but they bring very, very capable armed forces and a very resilient societies where with great industrial capacity. So the alliance as a whole has become stronger with the accession of Finland and Sweden. The funny thing is that Russia always talks about NATO as being a huge threat to them. If that was really true, they would have responded completely differently to the accession of first Finland and now Sweden a year later. Why am I saying that? The Russians didn't move one soldier away from Ukraine to the Finnish border. So if NATO really was a threat to them, they would have responded differently, because then they had to defend a 1,350-kilometer border with Finland. And they didn't, because they know we are a defensive alliance and we're not attacking them. So this is all for internal consumption that Putin is saying that. But it is great to have those two nations. Finland has a great history of collective defense. For 80 years, they had to do that on their own, and they took it very seriously. I think Sweden went through the same decisions as many other European nations in terms of the peace dividend and a lot of disinvestment. But Sweden has picked up with great speed and vigor. So I think in many ways we are all thrilled and happy to see Sweden and Finland as a member. Militarily, they were cooperating with us for a long time. They were in Afghanistan for 20 years with us, so they know, as no other nations, how to operate with NATO, and therefore it was a very smooth transition from being neutral or independent to become a member. And the funny thing is, I visited Finland and Sweden with the North Atlantic Council in, I think, November 2021. And I made a joke at the time to both the chiefs of defense. And I said, so when are you becoming a member? And they looked at me almost shocked and they said, never. Never. It will never happen. Okay. And 4 months later, they applied. And the reason for that is that they saw and understood that the rules-based international order we all defend is necessary to be neutral. Because if you are neutral, you need the rules-based international order. Because actually what you need is that another nation recognizes you as a neutral nation, which is partly arranged in this rules-based international order, and they need to respect the fact that you are neutral. And when Finland and Sweden saw that a sovereign state with internationally recognized borders was attacked by Russia, and therefore they violated the rules-based international order, they knew that to count on this was basically non-existent anymore. So there you are.
All right. We have around 10 minutes left. I see a couple of hands already. Can we get a mic here on the first row to this lady with the white jacket? Thank you.
Thank you very much. My name is Mariam. I am from Youth Atlantic Treaty Association International and Germany. So my question is, we as NATO help Ukraine a lot. But you mentioned this today, and we heard also from Mr. Stoltenberg that there is more needed. So I would ask, what concrete steps we have to do that our support is enough today, not in 6 months or 1 year, but today?
Yeah,
thank you.
That's a very good question, and I think that is part of the discussion that the defense ministers had with Mr. Stoltenberg and President Zelensky a couple of weeks ago in a virtual meeting, and it means digging deeper into first our stocks. Now, how deep the nations dig is for every nation to decide, because every nation is not only having an obligation towards NATO, but you have an obligation to yourself first. Because Article 5, everybody knows an attack on one is an attack on all, but Article 3 is for a reason before Article 5. And Article 3 says every nation has to be able to defend itself. That has been neglected for a very, very long time by many, many nations. But it means that, so in order to live up to that promise, basically to your own population, that's one of the first priorities of a government, to make sure they protect their own people. So if you give away ammunition to Ukraine, you take a risk, because if you are attacked and you don't have ammunition, how do you fight the enemy then? What the Secretary General has said, and what I say regularly, is as Ukraine is fighting our enemy, Russia, as long as they fight them, they cannot, or the chance that they attack us as well is much, much lower. I'm not saying it's impossible, but much, much lower. And at least with conventional warfare. I mean, hybrid warfare is something we see more and more popping up, but in terms of conventional weapons. So first is digging deeper in what we have. Second, many nations with the growing budgets have ordered ammunition and new capabilities 3, 4, 5 years ago, before the war. Some of that stuff is coming in to the nations. It's being delivered by the industry. So the nations have to decide for themselves, am I going to give that immediately away to Ukraine or not? And again, I'm not judging anyone on their decision, because it is not mine, it is theirs, because I don't have the responsibility to protect Sweden. I mean, Sweden has the responsibility to protect Sweden, and together, of course, we will also protect Sweden as NATO. But therefore, it's a sovereign decision by the nations. But that is one of the things they need to do, and so that is one. The second thing is to keep the maximum pressure on the growth of the production in the defense industry. And some of the things you can do it fairly quickly by, for example, working more hours with more shifts in a factory. But I hope by now that the factories that we have are doing that to the max. And if they then need to increase production, it probably requires building an extra factory or things like that. And we see that. We see there is groundbreaking work of a new factory in Germany for artillery grenades and for Patriots, but it will take at least a year, if not 1.5 years, before something comes from the belt in those factories. So it's a combination of things, and maybe, you know, look around the world and literally buy everything you can to give it to Ukraine then.
Okay, I would like the girl with the white shirt. Yes.
Thank you very much. I'm Anna Nalivayko and I work for a think tank in Brussels called the Martin Center. My question to you, Admiral, is about sort of the state of Russia's war economy, how long it can sustain the war, because we have seen Putin has been sworn again president and he has made some changes at the top right now. Russia has a new defense minister and he has transitioned to war economy partially. It's not a full transition yet. And it appears that even with the 14 round of sanctions that we have imposed by the EU, Russia is capable to keep producing military equipment, also with the help of China, North Korea, and Iran. So the analysis around it is somehow different. Some say that Russia is now at maximum capacity, cannot sustain that any longer, but some say that it's just the beginning, also considering the amount of men that Russia has and can send to the front. So what is your assessment of sort of this transition of to a war economy of Russia, and for how long can it sustain the war? Where do we stand now? Thank you.
These are questions that will never have an easy answer, because there are so many aspects that will basically define the outcome. One is how much money can Russia generate, for example, with oil and gas. Now, if they basically give away oil and gas in return for goods that go into weaponry, goods from China, for example, so they give away oil and gas to China, they get microchips and steel and things like that to build weapon systems and ammunition, then there's no added value to the economy. And then basically that is a problem in the longer term for Russia. That's the disadvantage of turning an economy into a war economy, because you basically only support the war effort, which is important if you talk about winning or losing. And the fact that they are doing that means that they are very, very serious about this. Don't underestimate the decision in Russia about this. They mean they want to win this war. And that's why we cannot allow them to win this war. Because if they win this war, this is not the end of the problems. It's the beginning of much more problems, not only with Russia, but also with autocracies somewhere else in the world. That might is right. So that is one. How can they still generate adding value to their economy? If that's not the case, in the longer run, they have a problem. We know that the special fund they had, there was a lot of money in it, and people say somewhere end of 2024, early 2025, it's empty, and therefore that money will be used because they have it has the priority. It has the absolute priority. But in many ways, there's no success in Russia. So there is not a long-term sustainable solution for him. I don't believe that. So therefore, and pessimists don't win wars, so therefore we have to be optimistic about this. We have to believe in we are more than half of the world's economy. If we say we cannot do this, who are we? Of course we can do this. Of course we can increase our defense production. Of course we can help Ukraine until it's over. We are able to do this. But we have to focus on this as well. And you slowly see some political leaders like Sunak in the UK, Macron in France, who are saying we need to put more focus on this effort to increase the defense production. But in our part of the world, it's not an order from the government. It is convincing financial institutions. It is making sure that people do things on their, based on their free will. But it needs a lot of convincing. And the financial institutions talk about, it's against the European sustainability goals, or it's not ethical to invest in the defense industry. I find it mind-boggling. But that's still the case in a number of situations, and serious financial institutions like pension funds that still say that, and say climate change and biodiversity is the two most important things that is happening now for our children. Well, wake up. The insecurity and the problems with our stability in terms of security is a serious problem for the new generation as well. And therefore, it takes a long time to convince people. That's sometimes the disadvantage of a democracy. But I believe once we are there, we probably have a better track record than somewhere else to make it work. I mean, COVID, we solved the vaccine problem with money. Basically, the ministers of finance put money on the table and said, make the vaccine now, not tomorrow, now. We can do that with the defense industry as well. But it's still not that urgent.
We have a lot of questions. I see also a lot of questions online, but unfortunately our time is up. So I would like to thank the Admiral Bauer for being with us. Maybe we can thank him with a round of applause. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And good luck.
Thank you, Admiral, for your insights regarding the defense industry and material acquisition, and also your statement regarding Ukraine and how we'll continue to support them for them to win the war. But now it is time for us to take a lunch break. So a couple of housekeeping items for each and every one of you. Lunch will be served here at Epicenter, up at the terrace. You will see the exit just right here. My colleagues will help and direct you in the right direction. And for those of you that's watching online, we encourage you to check out the networking and chat functions in the app. And when we get back, we will also initiate a poll quite, as soon as we get back. So have your phones and devices ready for when we are back here. So please make sure that you're back at your seats at 1:30 p.m. After the break, we will talk about new technologies, security, and challenges. So have a great lunch and see you soon. All right, everyone. Welcome back from lunch. It's a wrap. I hope you enjoyed your wrap. I hope you had a great lunch and the opportunity to mingle and talk to each other. We will continue now the agenda, which will focus on technology, followed by security and the newer challenges we are facing in these areas. But before we start, like I mentioned before, we will do another poll, and this poll will help us with the next session we have at hand. So remember, like before, when you vote, enter the app, go into the polls function, and submit your response. And the question is as follows. What are the biggest challenges brought in by new technologies? Type a keyword that you think best resembles and answers your question. Slow reaction. That's how I felt when I looked at the screen myself. All right. We have something going on here. It's always nice when you can use, free text to write whatever comes to mind. But these results will help our next session to frame it a little bit better. And by that, I would like to hand it over to Yanis Nasser from Vigilum, a French agency, which is at the forefront of the fight against disinformation, for an interactive presentation putting you in the shoes of an open source intelligence officer or investigator. So please, Yanis, take the stage.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Yanis, and I'm working at Vigilum, the French national service in charge of fighting foreign digital interferences. Back in Paris, I am an analyst, but, spoiler alert, I decided not to work today. You will be the analyst instead. For the next 15 minutes, your mission, if you accept it, will be to detect and analyze an information manipulation campaign targeting the running of a presidential election. Sounds exciting, right? But before we start, let me introduce to you your main tool as an analyst today. It's called Slido, and through this QR code, you will be able to detect and step-by-step counter this disinformation campaign. All right? So I give you time to scan this QR code, and if you don't, no worries, it will appear every time I will ask you questions. Ready? Okay. Every investigation starts first by monitoring. So let's have a look on Twitter and see what's going on in top trends. What you can see here is a tool that allows you to analyze top trends for the last 24 hours. On the left, you have the number of tweets, and at the bottom, you will have the hours per day. So let's see what's going on so far. What do we have? Cinema. All right. Nothing to really worry about. Champions League, here, nothing to really worry about, even though my colleague in Paris will not be very happy to see that. NATO Youth Summit, makes sense, of course. You should use the hashtag, by the way. Swifties, as always. And last but not least, okay, hashtag boycott election day. This is clearly interesting and maybe suspicious. And I don't say that because Taylor Swift is usually way more popular than politics, but because, as we can see here on the left, the hashtag went viral very quickly. So maybe we should click on this hashtag and see who is using it. Okay, we might have found something interesting. As we can see here, 90% of the tweets were posted by only 7 accounts. We are clearly in front of what is called astroturfing, that consists in artificially amplifying the visibility of an hashtag by using several means, such as inauthentic accounts or coordinated behavior. Here, it looks like these accounts are really trying to give the impression that everyone is going to boycott the election. They are talking about fraud, about corruption, manipulation. Some of them are even sharing images, and others are talking about an article from Der Spiegel. But we will come back on that later. First, we must identify if we're in front of fake accounts. More precisely, if we're in front of bots. You all know what bots are, right? These are automated computer programs designed to act like human and to post in an automatized way. But I agree with you. Now that we know the definition, the question is, how do we detect bots? And here, I will need your help. So, you have the possibility to select multiple answers, and please let me know, according to you, what should I look in order to detect bots? Okay. Yeah, looks like you're all very good, already excellent analysts. As it is true that the latest point, the fact that the username contains at least 3 numbers, is not that relevant. I mean, it's not because you have that you are necessarily a bot. However, the 3 others criteria are really useful and are used on a daily basis by our analysts at Visionium to detect bots. Okay, so now that we know what kind of accounts is trying to artificially amplify this hashtag, let's focus now on the content, the narrative, and analyze the message. Here, you have a screenshot of several tweets from the account Pixelcraft that is saying that we should boycott the election because of manipulation. As we can see, the narrative is the same. The message is the same, but the form is different. We go from no vote to no voting, from take a stand to make a stand. Here, it looks like this account is using the technique of copy-pasta that consists in duplicating the same content, but with very small differences between each messages. The idea here is to bypass moderation and to make its message look way more authentic. But lucky for us, we are all good analysts and we've been able to detect it. Okay, let's do a small break. What do we have so far? We have the artificial amplification of a call for the boycott of the election by bots that are using the technique of copy-pasta. And remember, I talked earlier about an article from Der Spiegel, but also on pictures. So let's focus on pictures, and I do have a surprise for you. Because I can see that you're a good analyst, but how good are you when it comes to recognize images generated by AI? Are you artificial intelligence hunters? So it will be a quiz. You will have 30 seconds to identify between 4 images which one is generated by AI. So no worries, you will have time to join the quiz. And here is the first cluster of images that are the profile pictures of our bots. Okay? So I give you the time to join the quiz, and you will be able also to see the pictures on your phone and to click on that if you want to zoom a little bit. Okay. All right. Ready? Let's go. You have 30 seconds. Almost everyone had the time to vote. Okay. Ready? Well, okay. And it was a little bit tricky, I must admit, because it was all of them. I agree. Sorry. It was just a little bit tricky for the first one, but no worries. You still have 2 tries to do so. So let's move on the second clusters of image. And here again, which image has been generated by AI? Oh, sorry, you may have to join once again the quiz. My bad. Okay. Are you able? Okay. Can you see the image on your phone? Perfect. Last few seconds. Okay. And the right answer was C, unfortunately. But it's okay, no worries. Last try, it will be a picture of a protest that is shared by some accounts with the hashtag boycott election day. Okay. So it's a little bit hard to, I must admit. Okay. Last one. Okay, and the right answer was C. Well, I mean, it's not that bad, and to be honest, it's quite difficult. That's why we're trying also to develop tools to detect, in an automated way, some images that are generated by AI. But this is also part of our job as analysts to assess the authenticity of some accounts that can be images, but also videos, or even more audio records. But as I said earlier, there was some images, but there were also an article from Der Spiegel. So now let's see this article. Then, oh, I forgot that. Congrats to Felix. I don't know where he is. Good, good, very good, very good. So you've been the fastest. All right. So now the article from Der Spiegel. It says the Greens have failed again due to poor decision by the Greens. Charging electric cars is significantly more expensive than refueling vehicles with internal combustion engines. Well, at this stage, nothing enough at all to say that we're in front of a fake news, or even more that we're in front of a disinformation campaign. But if we look from the beginning of this investigation, we've been in front of several inauthentic behaviors, from inauthentic accounts to images generated by AI. So how can we be sure that we're in front of the real Der Spiegel? Here, once again, I will need your help. It will be an open text, so there is no pre-selected choices. So feel free, don't be shy. You can do it here in Stockholm, but also online. Share your ideas on what should I look in order to be sure that I'm in front of the real media and not a copy. Yeah. Yeah. Well, OSINT investigation has no secret for you. Indeed. Right. I think we've figured out the most important one. So let's go back on our screenshot and take some of the elements step by step. As I said earlier, a divisive or wrong narrative, well, it's not enough, first of all, but also when you analyze information manipulation campaign, it's better to focus first on the behavior and then on the content. However, a mistakes in language and spelling can be a little bit more relevant. Here we are in front of a German-speaking media, a web page in German, but still there is a French word at the top on the right saying abonnement, which means subscribe. That should not be here, I suppose. But indeed, and I've seen that, what you should really focus on as soon as you express any doubt about the authenticity of a media is the URL. And here we are not in front of spiegel.de, we're in front of spiegel.ltd. And this is clearly characteristic of a modus operandi called typo squatting that consists in impersonating the appearance of a real media by using a domain name very close to the original one in order to give the impression to users that they are in front of the real media and spread easily false narrative. I don't know if you have heard about the RRN doppelganger campaign, but between June 2022 and May 2023, more than 350 news outlets across Europe, America, and Africa were targeted by this modus operandi. Well, it looks like we are already coming to the end of this investigation. And I must admit, I'm quite impressed by what you have done for the last 15 minutes, as you have been able to be really good analysts. You've been able to detect astroturfing. You've been able to identify boats. You've also been able to identify copy pasta, to recognize some images generated by AI, and to figure out that you were not in front of a real media. And this is what an analyst is doing on a daily basis. These are only some examples of modus operandi, but there is plenty others. But what you should really keep in mind is that for each modus operandi, there is still a way to detect and to counter it. And I'm very glad to see that now you are all able to detect by yourself an information manipulation campaign. So thank you for your participation. And if you want to learn more about Vigilum's work, here is a link toward our latest technical report called Portal Combat. And you can also follow us on our social media accounts. So thank you very much for your participation here in Stockholm, but also online. And enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Yannis. What a fun game, and at the same time so insightful. You have truly shown us that all of us in here can make a difference fighting disinformation. Civil society is important in this fight. This session leads perfectly into the next one, where we will continue discussing the challenges of foreign information, manipulation and interference, including in the world of gaming, and how institutions and the public can best respond. I welcome Sarah Karlstein, analyst at the Psychological Defense Agency, who will be moderating this session. The floor is yours.
Great. Thank you, Sarah. And thank you to the organizers for hosting this event and giving me the opportunity to moderate this session that addresses the very important and topical issues of how foreign information, manipulation, and interference, such as disinformation, challenges gaming and poses a threat to the gaming sector. We have also been promised to receive suggestions on how government entities and the public can best respond to this growing area of influence. My name is Sarah Karlstein. I work as an analyst at the Capability Development Department at the Swedish Psychological Defence Agency. I primarily work with issues regarding strengthening resilience among youth and civil society against disinformation and foreign malign information influence. This includes spreading and increasing knowledge, conducting trainings, and having strategic dialogue with both local and national NGOs. And with me on stage, I have Mr. Dominik Strikecki. He serves as a counselor at the Swedish Embassy in Tallinn. His main area of responsibility is psychological defense. Prior to his current position, he served as a senior analyst at the counter-influence branch of the operation department at the Swedish Psychological Defense Agency, where he mainly specialized in the operational countering of influence campaigns and analyzing how the private communication, entertainment, and gaming industry can be used as tools of foreign influence, be affected by it, or be a part of building resilience against it in democratic societies. I also have Ms. Aja Vinci, project leader for the Swedish Gaming Association, Sverok. Sverok is one of the largest youth organizations in Sweden that work with spreading different parts of the gaming culture around the country. Aja has led different projects working with extremism, racism, and toxicity on gaming and gaming adjacent platforms and the effect it has on youth and children. And last but not least, Mr. Robin El-Kadi, serving as a member of the international staff at NATO headquarters, working as part of the Information Environment Assessment team. He provides the Alliance with situational awareness of developments in the information environment, focusing in particular on hostile information activities. A warm welcome to all of you. I'm very pleased to have you in this panel and that you want to share your expertise with us. Now we're going to hear some opening remarks from the three of you, starting with you, Dominic. You will give some perspectives on threats and vulnerabilities in the world of gaming from the viewpoint of Swedish Psychological Defence Agency. I understand that you're concerned about the low awareness about these issues. I'm looking forward to hearing about that. Then over to you, Robin. You will continue talking from NATO's perspective, giving some examples of how institutions can counter and respond to information influence activities. And thirdly, over to you, Aya, sharing your deep knowledge and long experience of working with young gamers in Sweden, promoting gaming culture and making it accessible and safe for everyone. The floor is yours, Dominic, please.
Thank you so much, Sarah. Okay, this seems to be on. Okay, so for everyone who may not be familiar with the Psychological Defence Agency, I just want to start by saying that we look at foreign antagonistic information influence campaigns directed at Sweden, aiming to influence our decisions, opinions, and so on. So we don't look at a domestic debate, and we certainly don't monitor what Swedish gamers say or do to each other online. Looking at the gaming space, I mean, a good comparison is to compare with social media. I mean, social media, everyone knows about disinformation and propaganda being present in social media. And not unlike social media, gaming is also a huge digital infrastructure that can be used for telling stories, sending messages, and communicating in general. I think we have about 3.3 billion gamers in the world. You can compare that to the last figure I heard about Facebook was that they had like 2.9 billion users logging in monthly. So it is a huge space. There are, of course, differences. Gaming can be quite immersive, interactive in another way. It's a more fragmented space, and so on. But also it's a space where loyalties are formed quite quickly, and awareness of propaganda and disinformation is very low. So I wanted just to go through a few of the vulnerabilities that we have identified on gaming platforms. So first of all, game design. I mean, games can be designed in order to recruit, promote different political ideas, foster patriotic fostering, as we saw in the Kremlin leaks that games in Russia are being developed to do. They can be revising outcomes of actual wars by skewing historical facts, etc., etc. And we know that popular culture is shaping the way we see the world. Spending a lot of time in games can have the same effect or other types of effects as watching movies or reading books or listening to music. So it's something that we need to be aware of, at least. Also, games have social functions, not unlike social media in different ways. I mean, there are in-game chats or team building functions. We have seen radicalization, etc., on those types of platforms. Gaming adjacent platforms used for communication as well. We have advertising. I think that's an interesting one. After 2016, when we had the democratic Hindenburg of social media, it was advertising on social media was a bit like the Wild West. You could do dark ads. You could do all sorts of things. You could be based in St. Petersburg and do advertising in an election somewhere in a European country. Self-regulation is something that the social media companies have been doing after that, but this is something that has not yet happened in the gaming space. Political advertisement and other types of advertisement in gaming is a huge thing. We have seen presidential campaigns from Obama, for example, in basketball games or racing games or whatever. So it is a thing. Misrepresentation of game content is another. A lot of games are quite realistic, and content can be used to depict conflicts. We've seen this in the Hamas-Israel conflict, in Ukraine, etc. User data, also quite interesting. Gaming companies are quite on the front end of tech development when it comes to telling these stories and adjusting narratives based on data that is being collected on the fly, like everything from brain waves to pulse to eye tracking movement, to actually adjust the narrative in game based on data being collected, and also behavioral data and so on. We have sports washing, another one, and also I want to just mention countermeasures, and we were talking a little bit about this before we went on stage. Games can also, of course, be used as countermeasures against disinformation by either designing games that promote critical thinking. And one example is a totally different example is a Finnish magazine that created a room in the game Counter-Strike on a Russian server where they published information about the war in Ukraine just to circumvent the censorship. So there's a lot more we could talk about, but I think my 3 minutes are probably up. Thank you.
Maybe so. Thank you, Dominic. Yeah. Please, Robin.
Thank you. Hello, everybody. First, I wasn't sure whether to say this because I have a confession to my Viginum colleague as well. So I participated in the poll and I think I lost every single challenge. I'm sorry, you know. You can still trust in us, but this just shows that we always have to develop our tools, our people, and that we always have to continuously train. So I'll connect with you after to continue. So I'm super excited to be here, and I had a lot of different notes prepared, but I talked to a lot of you earlier and I just recognized, okay, you know everything basically, so I think you should all be here on stage. I was very nervously watching the poll at the beginning when you were voting what is the biggest challenge, what you perceive as the biggest security threat, and then disinformation came first. So, well, okay, the pressure is on for us and for my team, because that's exactly the thing we do. We continuously try to understand hostile information and disinformation. So I think first we can all agree that hostile information, that disinformation, they're both key security risks. Maybe just like to visually represent this, hands up who agrees with that statement, that disinformation, hostile information are the key security threats. Right. Maybe I should have asked who doesn't agree, and then we could have put people on the spot a bit. But basically, this is exactly what NATO thinks. We care about the information that circulates. We care about the information that reaches you on your smartphones, media environment, laptops, and because information doesn't just stay in the communication realm, it of course has political, security, military effects and consequences. What happens, for instance, if based on disinformation, we stop believing in certain institutions? Or what happens if based on disinformation, we stop believing in the necessity to support Ukraine? And NATO, we also care about the information that circulates because foreign states are actively leveraging this information to achieve their political goals and to influence us, to influence you. So, but what happens if that continuously develops? So we've come a long way. So first, we at NATO, we recognize that disinformation, that hostile information, that they're both threats to national security. So we've come a long way here. We recognize that they're both a matter of collective defense. And of course, the resilience issue, we talked a bit earlier as well. We heard how important the more resilient we are, the more protected we are as well. And of course, it cannot be treated in isolation, this issue, right? It is a society issue, and it actually involves a whole of society approach to counter this. So we all have to work closely together, what we do. It cannot, of course, only be solved by NATO. So we all understand, okay, we recognize the threat. So, but now the question is, what does NATO do to respond? Just want to offer a couple of thoughts and then happy to discuss. So firstly, of course, that's what the key thing that my team is doing. We, as a first priority, we have to first understand the threats. So we continuously track disinformation, hostile information activities in order to then enable more effective response options here. And we leverage the latest technology to do so. We'll reflect a bit on that later as well. So, but you can say if you just focus on monitoring, if you just focus on tracking disinformation, hostile information activity, something very important is lost. what about our own messages, right? And of course, this is a key priority for us, to actually make our own voice heard amidst all the disinformation out there. So this is one key thing that we're focusing on as a way to counter disinformation. So here we always try to engage the right audiences with correct information, that they actually base their views and their opinion on correct information and not on disinformation, right? Everybody's entitled to their own opinion, of course, but we just want to make sure that the opinion is based on factual information, not on disinformation, right? So we try to engage new audiences. We work, of course, with journalists. We work with think tanks, universities. We work with content creators. We run grants. We try to engage Russian language audiences and so on. And of course, we also try to engage newer communities like the gaming community. So just 3 final points from my side, given the nature of this panel, and since I used to play the fair amount of games myself, I just wanted to offer a couple of things, lessons learned, lessons we can learn from the gaming world to apply them, and what we do with these lessons at NATO. Okay, basically it's me. What have I learned from the gaming world, and how does that influence my work at NATO? So growing up, I promise, I'm 1 minute and then I'm done. Growing up, I used to play this game with a good friend of mine, Gothic. Hands up, who knows this game? Oh my God, I think I'm maybe too old already, geez. Okay, some. So it's this open world medieval fantasy game, right? So you can do quests, or like me and my friend Jonas, we lost ourselves in the open world, basically. So a couple of things what I've learned from this experience, right? Number one, it's all about creative thinking, right? With games, you are dropped into new worlds, you're confronted with new problems, you have to conceptualize new worlds. And this is exactly what we do at NATO, right? The threat level isn't the same, right? It always develops, it is dynamic, it adapts. And that's why at NATO, we always develop our people, our processes, and our tools to actually remain dynamic as there are constantly new worlds to explore. Secondly, with these open world games, like the inventory, like the storage is limited, right? So you always have to decide which items to sell, which items to invest in, and so on. And of course, I know it's a bit, but this is basically what we do at NATO. Of course, our inventory is way more, we have way more storage, but we always invest in very new capabilities to actually make sure that we leverage AI, that we leverage the latest technology to protect our citizens better. So this is one thing to deal and to recognize these resources. Then last point, and I don't want to get too emotional, but it's all about the habits that you cultivate, right? Like there are endless opportunities in these open worlds, right? So it's about developing habits and growing through. Sometimes you fail a request, like you fail a quest, and then you have to return when you're stronger, when you upgrade it. And of course, you know, this is way easier and less frustrating in the gaming world, in the real world, but this is something, right? Like you try something, like you fail, then you try it again, and you fail, you learn from it, and then you do it again. Again, less frustrating in the gaming world. But this is exactly it at NATO as well. We always try to, every day we remain focused on executing, on understanding, executing the tasks that we get, and understanding that complex environment. So it's like not one thing that can be done in one sprint. It has to be done as a continuous habit. I'll end here. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Robin.
Thank you. I'll try to keep it quite short. So now
no stress.
But I think it's a great idea that we should cooperate more, and that is something that the civil society has been saying for a long time. So I represent Sverok. We are a Swedish youth organization who we have different clubs all around Sweden where we help children and youth organize around their hobby, which is gaming. It's not only online gaming, which we mostly will talk about here, but there are different types of games, such as board games and everything from that we think is nerdy and fun, basically. But disinformation is something that is spreading more and more, and something that is very important, which is one of the reasons that we are here. According to a study conducted by Swedes and the Internet 7 out of 10 children in 2023 use gaming platform to communicate with their friends online. So more and more are using gaming spaces to be with their friends and to socialize, which is also why we see extremists using and exploiting these types of platform. Earlier this year, we also released a report called Extremism in Gaming, where we can see that about 64% of children between the ages of 12 and 20 have at some point in the game experienced right-wing extremism, which is quite a lot. And this is only in Sweden, but we can see that these are also something that this is all of. I mean, gaming is such an international space. It's quite difficult to say that this is only Sweden, but these are Swedish children's experiences. We also see that 1 out of 10 children have experienced hateful comments or discrimination about Muslims or Jews, which we also has increased now with the Israel and Palestine conflict, as well as a lot of negative content during the Ukrainian-Russian war. So we see how gaming platforms are being abused and exploited, but also why they are relevant today and why social issues are being brought up. Because so many people are I think about 80% of everyone around the world has at some point played a game, or 70%, which is quite a lot, which is also why these extremists use these platforms. Let me just see in my notes that I don't forget anything. But apart from this, it is also important that adults are being engaged and are aware what is happening online. With the study that I conducted, a lot of children said that they were afraid to speak to a parent or adult if they experienced something online, because they said that they wouldn't understand. And children that are isolating themselves are even at a larger risk of experience hateful comment and being radicalized by these actors. So I think it's very important that we are here and we can speak about these issues. And I think I'll stop there.
Thank you very much, Shaya. And also you, Dominic and Robin. And now we will proceed with the questions from the audience, both online. I have some questions here on my iPad, but we also want to open the floor for the audience here in the room. So you can prepare some questions, and before that, I can take the opportunity to ask a question myself to all three of you, or rather it's 3 questions in one. It's about challenges of disinformation. So what are you most worried about when it comes to disinformation and information influence in the world of gaming? How have the problems changed over time? Would you say that there are any particular factors that have influenced this? Who wants to start? Yeah?
The one that holds the mic, I guess. Well, from our perspective, I'm bringing a youth perspective here, we can see that a lot of this information or a lot of extremist content is being normalized in gaming. A lot of the children are experiencing this or right-wing extremism, for example, right-wing comments very often, and it's that, okay, this is just something that I have to deal with and have to get past. Also because there are so many people that are using gaming platforms or gaming adjacent platforms, there is much wider content for disinformation to spread. But I'll see if anyone else has a better answer.
Yeah, well, so as I said, I think awareness is the biggest problem. When it comes to social media, we have journalists, we have academics, we have think tanks, we have politicians, everyone is kind of, focusing on disinformation being spread on social media, but that's not the case when it comes to gaming platforms. So that's vulnerability the biggest vulnerability. And also we know that the actors we are dealing with, be it states or hostile bigger organizations, they are very, very creative at exploiting different means to reach people. So yeah, that's what I'm most worried about. And then to the question about if this is increasing or changing, we don't know enough to say that at the moment, because I mean, we're seeing more and more. But is it because we know where to look? We gain more knowledge, or if it's increasing? I have no idea. But also, I would like to say that if someone's interested in this subject, the Lund Psychological Defense Research Institute, it's called, has published a report where they identify 40 different methods of spreading information influence on gaming platforms with attached examples. So it's downloadable on our website. So please read that.
Great tips. Okay, any questions from the room? Yeah. Okay, first one here in front. We'll have someone coming with microphone.
Thank you so much. This is incredibly interesting. I'm wondering a bit, because we're talking a lot about what kind of disinformation and who are targeting these young people and where this kind of radicalization is being found. I'm more curious as to, and what I feel like we haven't talked about yet, but I'm sure we'll get into, is what are some of the things you do to kind of combat this? Because I understand you can do critical thinking education and media literacy training, but it seems within the gaming sphere, compared to like social media, which is like much more accessible and mainstream and it's easier to access, gaming a lot of the time can take place in like private servers and like, you know, there's private Discord groups, and it's much more intimate in a way. What are some of the mechanisms you use to kind of combat this radicalization and the sort of spread of this information? Thank you.
Great question.
Thank you. Just maybe a couple of thoughts, and also in the interest of time that we have more time for questions as well. Great point, and we of course have to be realistic. We heard how many people are gamers. We of course, you know, we can't. First thing is we try to make our voices heard on different platforms. But of course, as you say, some of them can't be accessed. But at least we try to engage the gaming community as one, right? A couple of years before, like government agencies, government bodies, they didn't know about Twitch, right? But now NATO, for instance, we sometimes hosted Twitch events, right? And one thing here to increase reaches, we engaged, we worked with content creators on the gaming platforms. Actually, I played Among Us with a gaming influencer, and cuts on the table, I've never played Among Us before. And I won one round, I just want to say. Anyhow, with the gaming influencer, The Royal Viking, that's his real name. So, I mean, just like trying to actually think, how can we make our voices heard, and maybe how can we engage community leaders as a first step, and then we try to work closer with you, all that we can broaden that scope.
I just want to, I agree, absolutely. But also,
You can also disagree.
No, not in this issue. Okay. Maybe other things. But we should also take this, I think it's something that a lot of adults should take seriously, first of all. Gaming is something that is usually dismissed, or something that if something happens online, it might not be taken as seriously, such as we've come a long way with social media, as you said, but not as long in the gaming aspect of this. So from a youth perspective, I think of course there are measurements that we can take, such as laws and other measurements as well. But I think it's important for adults also to be involved, so we can work in that sense as well, and ask your children, what are you doing online? Who are you playing with? Who are your friends online as well? I think these are important questions to ask, just as we ask these questions when they are in schoolyard, or who their friends are IRL, so to speak.
Yeah, and I think most things are already said, and you're right. I mean, the gaming world is different also from the social media world. It is much more fragmented, and I don't think the answer here would be to look in every dark corner of of gaming. But I mean, awareness among players, gamers, awareness among game developers. I don't think anyone wants, you know, antagonistic actors in gaming exploiting and spreading disinformation. So I really hope that we can, I mean, together with the gaming industry, avoid a 2016 type of moment that we had with the social media companies.
A related question that we got online is, several ways of fighting disinformation are based on self-management and self-responsibility, especially for social media platforms. In order to avoid direct censorship interventions by the government, is it really possible to fight disinformation on a global scale without censorship?
Yes.
I can only agree. Censorship is not something that we are very fond of. There are definitely other ways that we can tackle this.
Agree or disagree?
We're doing one sentences. Oh God, this is too much pressure. But yeah, of course, like we can't, you know, like prohibit people from speaking, but we can engage the platforms more to actually, you know, tell them about, they know about the threat, but just to work closer with the companies as well.
I think we have time for one more question from the room. Goes to you here in front.
Thank you very much for this insightful discussion. I will refer a little bit to the first NATO's new strategic concept that, as a novelty, mentions China and China's opaque strategic agenda as a potential security challenge for our Euro-Atlantic security. And coupling this with the fact that we, of course, within our alliance still lack a common response. We see some countries that have decided to ban TikTok, for example, and some that have very complex interdependencies when it comes to their economies and their critical infrastructure with this global actor. And I would really want to hear your opinion regarding China's potentially being a security challenge when it comes to foreign information manipulation and different platforms that operate in our countries with very different ways of engaging audiences and very different ways of potentially being disinformation channels. Thank you.
Thanks for this very important question. Just the interest of time, this can be a long conversation. We can, you know, we're all around all day, so we can talk later as well. But just very briefly, first thing, you said it yourself, right? NATO recognizes China, and you all might have read our strategic concept. China is recognized as what you said. So thanks for pointing that out as well. So we take it seriously. We always try to, as an alliance, we focus on tracking the threat picture that is shaped by all kinds of different actors. So we're not interested only on one. So we want to pursue a 360 approach to actually understand what are the key actors that actually shaping, trying to leverage disinformation, hostile information to actually undermine the security of the alliance. So first thing, we do recognize it, and we've come a long way as well. If you think of how many countries as a NATO alliance come together to develop the strategic concept that mentions the competition that China causes here. But we'll talk more after this.
Great. And now our time is up, unfortunately, but great idea. Keep the discussion afterwards. Thank you very much for this thought-provoking talk. It certainly raised many interesting perspectives, both when it comes to challenges, but also I'm glad that we touched upon some good advice on effective message that democratic societies can take in order to strengthen resilience and tackle antagonistic influence on gaming platforms. Thanks to the audience online and here in the room, and thanks to the panel, and have a good afternoon.
Thank you very much, Sarah Karlstein, and all the panelists. I kind of see some reference to Marie Magdalena's contribution earlier today, one of the Youth Challenge winners. She had the idea of, doing education through social games on the app, etc. We should not neglect the platform where we play the games. I wish we would just have realized that when I played World of Warcraft 10 years ago. But anyways, let's continue our dive through now we're going to focus on tech. So I would like to introduce our next session that will introduce some of our newest technologies in our lives and the challenges and opportunities they pose to our shared security. So please welcome the moderator of this next talk, an alliance ready for tomorrow's challenges, innovation, AI, technology, and security, Mr. Oskar Molander, former Swedish UN youth delegate to the General Assembly, National Youth Council of Sweden. Warm welcome.
And of course, thank you so much. From one panel about tech to another panel about more tech. I hope you still have some energy in you to listen to more of this very interesting theme. So as previously mentioned, this will be a panel about an alliance ready for tomorrow's challenges, focusing on innovation, AI, technology, but also most importantly, security. I'm very, very happy to also have this fantastic panel with me. We have, first and foremost, Ingrid af Stoltenberg, which is the chairman of Stockholm AI. You've run an independent consultant company. You work with different tech startups and an expert in AI, cyber, but also water. We also have Maves Rauch with us, which is a fellow, a youth fellow at the International Think Tank. You are also a JPO at UNHCR, have several years of experience working in international affairs on peace and conflict situation. And last but not least, we also have Christine Beitland with us, which is the Nordic Government Affairs Director at Microsoft. You work a lot with tech and society issues, and also serves as a member in multiple boards from business, tech, but also sustainability. So we have an exciting panel, just as exciting as the topic AI. And AI shares a lot of, there's a lot of optimism when we talk about AI innovation and tech, but there's also a lot of concern, and that concern also often relates to the ethical use of AI and human rights, reliability, and of course the security of the tech. I want to start off this panel with a question to you, Christina. As 2024 is not just any year, it's quite an extraordinary year when it comes to elections, as almost half of the world's population is going to the voting booths and elections all around the world. So how do you perceive this year in relation to the risks, but also the opportunities regarding tech, AI security, with electoral processes, and of course, democratic integrity?
Well, thank you. And first of all, thank you to NATO and all the coordinators of this fantastic event. Thank you for all the questions that you had this, during the event. This was a big learning session, I must say. And wow, Sweden is in NATO. I'm from Norway, so I'm very happy about that. To elections. It's the historic election year. I mean, more people will vote in 2024 than ever in history. 40 plus countries, 4 billion people are going to choose their leaders, their representatives, and it's a fantastic opportunity. At the same time, it's a very pivotal time on the whole geopolitical issues. And I'm basically thinking of three things. Generative AI is on the rise. We all got our hands on ChatGPT in November 2022, right? It moved into our classrooms, it moved into our works, and we have it everywhere. Now, you as a coming generation, that's not going to only define my generation of what we have here, it's going to define your coming generations. Think about that. It's going to shape that. But it has tremendous opportunities. It gives us more prosperity. It will give us more, more value creation in the sense of productivity, etc. But there's one dark cloud, and that is how do we sacred our democracies? Because this fantastic development of technology can also be used as a weapon and a tool against the core of our democracies, which is the right to vote. And I must say, our first line of defense, And I'm very excited about it. I'm a, what should I say, a small optimist in this area. And I must say, the technology is our first line of defense. AI and hyperscale cloud. Why am I saying that? Because every single day, we get up to 60 to 80 trillion security signals coming down from the platform, a global international platform, the biggest one we have. That, in a sense, the machines help us moderate where that's coming from and can alert across the other part of the world. To give you an example, in Ukraine, the hours before the invasion, we could see it online, what was happening. So we could alert the Ukraine government as the customer in order for them to move. It's a fantastic thing that you need to take into account when we are in the modern society. How do we twin and mirror our infrastructure, both in the whole spectrum of peace, crisis, and war? And we share what we see with governments. We have government security programs in 47 countries. These are real-time ongoing attacks, if you like, or prevention of attacks that we share with the CERT, the government CERTs. And it's also something we share on our open reports. So together with that, Microsoft has also a Microsoft Threat Analysis Center, which will be contrary to the Government Intelligence Center. This also gives us eyes on, and the expert that we have, we can follow the threat picture and we have the capability to act. I think you got to think about this in the modern world. The platform where it's happening, we own, we innovate, and we develop. We are the first line to protect when an incident happens. That means we got a partner. The total resilience of a society depends on every part, every single one of us. If you work in tech, if you're an individual person, if you work for the government on the really end of defense, the first lines, you really got to work together. So I think we're in Sweden, in the Nordics. I drive the Nordics in the sense to try to bring awareness into. We are going to continue to see the Nordics attractive for attacks. We have followed the Russians' aggression when it comes to cyber operations, not only in Ukraine, but against the allies. We will see that also going forward. We see them be more sophisticated, increasing their attacks. We see them even, convincing and if you know everything from actors that brings the false news about President Zelensky. We had examples of that. We see how they target the infrastructure and the value chain of energy sector in the Ukraine. We've seen that, how that brought crisis. We saw even in the food supply chain. This will continue, and we got to wake up. We got to come together because we all have a play to do in this. So for elections, I must say, I'm a slightly optimist because we are ahead of the opponent, if you like, still. But that means that defense also got to work closely with us, and they do, to understand what are the coming technologies. What are the emerging technologies they need to know and they need to build the next generation of defense for. So yes, so that's all about partnership, actually, and we'll talk more about that later, maybe.
Yeah, we'll talk more about that, and I'm happy that you're optimistic. That makes me a little bit more calm, and I truly believe that partnership is the new leadership, and we're gonna discuss that more about how private and public sector could work together. But now I wanna change to Ingrid and ask you a little bit about. Currently, we have heard the topic of responsible AI, focusing on trust and trying to avoid all these bad parts when it comes to the development of AI. From your experience, what concerns or potential risks do you consider are the most pressing in the ongoing development of AI? And we've also heard by some influential tech people that halting and stopping the development of AI could be needed. What do you think? Will we come to a time where we need to stop the development?
Yeah, so thank you. I'll start with the first one.
Yeah.
I'm also very glad that you're an optimist. I'm a general optimist as well. But I also think sort of understanding the problem is the first step towards the solution. And I think the greatest challenges right now in terms of tech is the cyber threat, basically. And by cyber threat, I mean not only hacker attacks, but also misinformation, disinformation, understanding what is truth, and understanding provenance. And by mis and disinformation, so misinformation is just erroneous, not necessarily malign. Disinformation is information that's wrongful but intended to mislead. And we see this rising a lot. And we also see, like in the exercise we had before about the bots, right? I think Robin mentioned well that, you know, we have to make our own voices heard, but no real person will push, you know, 90% of content and repeat themselves a lot. So there is a palpable risk that a sort of unlawful or misleading content will outcrowd the sort of right or the human-generated content. I mean, already next year, 90 to 95% of all information on the internet will be AI-generated. The AI that generates this information is taught based on data on the internet. So there's kind of a circular reference there. And if you then start seeing outcrowding of bots with sort of that comes from a sort of malign intent or false information, that's a challenge. However, I'm also an optimist. So naturally you start thinking about solutions. And I think a lot of the solutions lies in understanding the provenance or the agenda of information, because I think that quality and responsibility, etc., is very contextual. However, it would be useful to be able to identify, you know, is this content that I'm seeing likely to stem from a human? What would be the demographic profile of that human, statistically speaking? What's the highest probability of the sender or the bot or the agenda of it? So that's sort of part of the challenge, but also part of the solution, I believe. And your second question was regarding the break. So I suppose everyone here heard that a lot of heavy hitters in tech, including Elon Musk, etc., asked for a pause in AI development whilst we sort of think a little bit more about how do we want to do this and not just race for the bottom. At the same time, though, he did start like in the shadows with his own AI initiatives, if we're talking about Musk. I think that's kind of indicative of the challenge we're facing here. It's what economists would call a prisoner's dilemma. Now, I'm not an economist, but I did some basic economist courses, and basically what a prisoner's dilemma means is that everyone, society as a whole, might benefit if everyone just pauses and sits down and thinks a little bit of how we want to do it. But for any individual actor, you'd be individually better off by not doing that. So even if a lot of well-intended actors like, well, Microsoft or NATO or Musk, if he's well-intended, people argue about that right now, even if they decide to pause, do we think that North Korea will pause? Do we think that Russia will pause? Do we think that a lot of terrorist cells will pause? Most likely not. So that pause really hinges on there being incentives for everyone to pause. And as I said, I'm not an economist. I haven't found a solution to that. However, we can incentivize and we can regulate. And going into a little bit on the regulation, what I find interesting there is that if you look at the EU and the US, we have chosen a regulatory path of sort of input regulation. So the US has started to regulate larger models. Like if you're about, like 1 teraflop of compute power, or like, so basically how big is the training of the model, or how compute intense. That defines how you be regulated. In the EU AI Act, it's based on the intended use of the models when you're training them. So again, sort of input related. That's very difficult when you have an extremely fast-moving landscape, because we don't really know what the input can and will look like. China, on the other hand, has chosen an output based regulation, where they say basically that if your model is producing Chinese non-culturally aligned content, then you're doing wrong. Like then it's wrongful. And you know, we might debate whether or not sort of anti-Chinese cultural should be the best sort of benchmark for whether or not a model is producing ethical content. Most people here might disagree that that's the sort of right sort of watermark that you're ascribing to, but we have, you know, we have human rights and other sort of conventions that we are ascribing to, and we could try to sort of see, okay, but how are we conforming to them? Regardless of how big your model is, or regardless of the application, are we conforming with human rights, for example? So, short answer, I think in an ideal world, pausing development would be great. I think in practice, I can't see how that would be working.
Well, I was pretty sure that I wouldn't get a clear yes or no answer. I mean, as you said, it's one thing in theory, but another thing in practice.
Yeah, somebody said that in theory and practice is the same. In practice, it's not.
Yeah. Well, perfect closing remark. Going over to you, Mace. We kind of ended off on the topic of human rights. You, as I previously mentioned, having a little bit of experience from peace and conflict. AI today is used a lot in different sectors when it comes to, you know, forecasts and predictive decisions and such. How do you anticipate AI and tech to impact the humanitarian efforts? And I mean, both today, but also in the foreseeable future.
Well, thank you very much for the question, first of all. I think oftentimes the first time you link AI and humanitarian efforts, the questions arise about the ethical application and development, which is, of course, true. But today I want to focus more on the potential that AI actually holds within the humanitarian sphere, and I think that that potential is quite high. Let me allow you to say 2 or 3 sentences about the humanitarian situation overall, the challenges we face within it, in order to then link what AI can do to overcome that challenges. So at the moment, as humanitarian actors, we face a huge challenge as humanitarian needs and humanitarian resources are ever growing. You all know why that's the case, because of multiple crises. We've talked about the war in Ukraine, armed conflicts in Gaza, in Sudan, but also environmental challenges in such as the recent floodings in Eastern Africa or Brazil. And at the same time, we receive less humanitarian funding as organizations. So of course, there's a huge gap there.
Yes. Oh my God. But I'm scared if I say that a lot of people will.
And where that leads to is that many humanitarian organizations kind of are trapped within a reactionary position. We have little time and little resources to actually build up resilience, but we are only hoping for another humanitarian disaster not to come up within the next month and allocating all the resources that we have towards it. And I think that's kind of where I can step in order to support humanitarian organizations to go a bit more from reactionary humanitarian action towards proactionary humanitarian action. And that sounds maybe very straightforward and simple, but it comes with a lot of added resources, because pro-action or resilience building means being more affected. It means having less humanitarian suffering, maybe even less death. So it's actually a very big step forward that we can make. And I think AI can play a big role in risk management, in resource allocation, foreseeing different risks. And I want to mention 3 examples. The first one within the context of displacement would be AI chatbots that could make certain rights more accessible. One example for refugees would be to have a chatbot that assists with legal assistance, but also in terms of crises to tell people where to go and how to act. The second example, which the second and third one would also be somewhat linked to NATO, maybe for different purposes, but is using AI technology to analyze satellite images, for example, in order to foresee floodings or similar occasions. And the third one is basically AI has the power to analyze combined data sets. And that's at UNHCR, for example, we have a project called Jetson, which is based in Somalia. And the idea is to use AI to analyze combined data sets, which is demographic data, environmental data, economic data, in order to foresee the risk of potential forced displacement movements within different regions of Somalia. And of course, me as a humanitarian, I look more on the side, not necessarily where the conflict will start. Of course, that's important to know, but then where will the people move in order for us to allocate resources, humanitarian resources, but to set up refugee camps, these kind of things. But I think it's two sides of the same coin talking about NATO, because for them, I think a similar model would also be important to foresee potential sources of conflict. And in that sense, I think overall, of course, you mentioned it, it's for us, it's very clear how AI should be developed. In the humanitarian sphere, we have agreed up on 4 humanitarian principles. And additionally, a do not harm principle, which is particularly important for us working with vulnerable populations. So in that sense, as long as AI is developed along those lines, from my side, I don't necessarily see a problem or the need to pause it. I think what's happening right now, what's the major problem is that AI is not developed along these lines in many spheres. And of course, what happens is that it can be used for good and for negative purposes. So I think what's very important is maybe not to pause it, but to agree up on a certain set of rules, ethical rules, humanitarian rules, and human rights rules. We have all agreed up on human rights, and sometimes when we see big potentials coming up, we tend to forget about them. But even then, it's the more important, because if we don't think about them right now in the development, then later on in the application, it will backfire in terms of humanitarian suffering, or maybe also the risk of conflict. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And from what I hear, the opportunities are many, but I mean, once again, as previously mentioned, partnership is key, I can imagine, for organizations such as UNHCR and other in doing humanitarian efforts and combining tech in these efforts. Time is running away, which I kind of imagined, considering this being a very short panel and a big topic. But I want to give a quick question to you, Christina. Try to be short. But how do you see the public and private partnership help tackle security challenges that are posed by new tech and emerging technologies?
Well, I think it's essential. I think it's essential, especially in this election years that we talked about. There's a sense of urgency, actually, when it comes to that, to come together, share resources, share expertise. I also would like to bring up the opportunity to talk about, when we have this World Cup ongoing on regulation on AI, where are the Nordics? The value set that we have in the Nordics, with cybersecurity, human rights, with social equality, is actually a voice that should be in there. So pay attention to that as well. That's collaboration as well. Regulation. We have internally worked with this for 8 years, going from the ethical principles into, standards for AI, and now also asking for regulation. But I think most of all, when it comes to elections and the deep fake that we worry maybe most about, and we see examples of, we have done quite a bit of concrete actions right now. Tech Accord is the newest initiative to combat kind of use of deepfake in elections. That's quite a bit of initiatives. One of the key initiatives ongoing right now is training parliament members, candidates for the upcoming elections, in how to detect, right? The exercise that we had today, how do you detect deepfakes? How can you see them? How can you prevent them from interfering in the process? The other thing we do is actually, last week we launched a new initiative called Resilience, Resilience Initiative, and a fund to be able to train in the educational wise, the voters, election wise. So every single one of us have this feeling. And that's when I fell a little bit in love with the gaming today, so we can reach all the audience, in different ways, in understanding why is this core to our democracies? Because keep in mind, we live in a digital democracy where states are using cyber attacks, cyber operations to reach their political targets. And we are the targets. We have to to really fight for the rights that we have around, and we do a lot internally as well. We have the Microsoft Democracy Forward initiative, we have the Tech Accord initiative that also builds sentiments, knowledge, and train the different really vulnerable groups when it comes to this, and especially the politicians that are up for election and that are often the targets. So I want to end by saying, because we have the Admiral on stage, and I want to quote something that I want to leave you with, which that he said, you know, if we're going to win the war, we need a digital backbone. What he's really underscoring is that we need public-private partnership. All of us need to come together, military, civil, public-private, multi-global, to be able to fight this if we're going to stand up for our rights and the core of our democracies, which is the right to vote. So I think I'm going to leave it at that. That actually we can keep the digital piece. I do believe in that. And most of all, we have a future for our democracies. So thank you.
Thank you so much.
We have time for some questions. You have 10 minutes left.
All right.
Yes, you have the countdown here as well. So
yes.
Please continue.
So if we have any questions here in the audience, please start by introducing yourself and then your question, and please stand up as well. And then I'll start off with that person in the back. So please stand up and introduce yourself.
Hello, my name is Samuel Wolf from Ludwig Maximilian University, Munich. Thanks for having us today. What I would be really interested in is, from your experience, especially in cybersecurity, I'm very interested in which terrorist cell is the most skilled in doing cyber attacks these days. Which is the most dangerous right now for Europe, for the West, from your experience? Thank you.
I don't know if there's any here in the panel that feels...
I'm going to do a Bauer, you know, the Admiral Bauer answer. It depends on the context. But I think, you know, China has been mentioned. And I do want to mention that influential operation with China, we saw them massively scale using generative AI as well. I think it was 130 million in reach, over 40 plus different languages, not only the Chinese population. And it's often to build a positive sentiment of China and a dissentiment for the West, especially the US. So I would watch for that going forward. And they have the technical capabilities, you know, so they are the ones to watch for. Another thing that keeps me up at night sometimes, if I'm going to be really honest, is the partnership that we see sometimes between China and Russia. So, you know, if the Russians were to get the same capabilities, we have seen more sophistication. We have seen, you know, they work, and the blur between cyber attacks, espionage, so that's also something to watch for if they get even more capabilities. That's why we got to work close, you know, with defense. So we have the far front of defense. I don't believe in putting this on pause. This is this is a knowledge revolution. You can't put that on pause. Then people that don't want as well are going to just, you know, run around in the high-speed train, and we're going to be left in the station trying to tackle it. So we got to be far in the front, and we need everyone on board. So I don't know if that answers your question, but that's some of the things that I'm a little concerned about.
Yeah, and I think we're kind of talking about two types of cyber threats as well, right? One is the influence operations, which is basically like the botnets and the bot farms that reached, I don't know, the Russian bot farms in the 2016 elections. I don't have the figures for the 2020, but it was something like 130 million people in the US election in 2016. That's the disinformation. Then we have the hackers. And I think that in hackers, and correct me if I'm wrong, my impression is that when it comes to hacking and gaining not necessarily unlawful access to our brains and attention, but unlawful access to our data, then you have kind of these middle layers, like the Lazarus network, which are basically employed by terrorist cells or nation states to do these hacks. And that's horribly enough, it's an extremely lucrative market. So I would say my concerns are on the one hand, like you say, you know, Russia and China teaming up in terms of influence operations, but also these very, very basically money printing middle sort of hacker operations like Lazarus, for example. Strongly recommend I think it's called the $1 Billion Heist. It's on Netflix or SVT or something where they detail basically a quite long-running heist about how they basically almost stole $1 billion from the Central Bank of Bangladesh. Very interesting. It was also very recently where actually, I think it was one of your colleagues, a coder who discovered a backdoor into the entire sort of Linux operating system, which is an operating system that very few of us perhaps use knowingly on a daily basis, but basically the entire underlying infrastructure of the internet. And so there's a lot going on there, but that's a far more advanced thing, which I think is more centralized to sort of hacker groups. But the influence operations, I think, is what kind of influences us more nudgingly, which is very scary, because I agree that the fundamental sort of democratic right is the right to vote, but also, like, how do you decide what to vote for? So I think maybe we should add something about the right to unbiased information in the human rights.
So
I would just, two or three sentences, I'll really keep it short. I would say thank you for your question. For me, it's more, though I like talking about politics, it's more a political question. And for me right now, I would say the more important question is not who is the biggest terror organization in that sphere, but how can we be the most resilient? And I think when it comes to resilience and looking at building resilience within NATO societies, then it doesn't really matter who the opponent is. We have to create resilience the same way. And I think at the moment, you also talked about technology being the first line of defense. I would even go one way farther and say the people using that technology are the first line of defense. Then we talk about attacking different institutions. In the end, what's happening, usually it's individuals at these institutions who are being tackled. And I think it's around 80 or 90% of successful cyber attacks that are starting with very ordinary phishing emails. So it's often these big scandals start with very small things with individual people. And at the moment, I think with cybersecurity, one big problem is we think about it maybe when we are onboarded somewhere, when we start having a passport. And then for the next 2 or 3 years until we get into a new job, it's not really a thing we think about it. So I think education is really key to bring it back into our minds on a daily basis and not just whenever it comes up.
Thank you. You were lucky, because I don't think we do have time for one other question. Okay, we have time for one more question, and I'm gonna do one from the live stream, to be fair. So we have one from the room and one from the live stream, and that might actually connect pretty good with the previous question, because this might be even a bit more tangible. Because the question is, what measures can be taken by the government and or companies to prevent AI-powered international campaign manipulation attempts?
Yeah, we talked a little bit about it. Tech Accord is actually the tech companies coming together. The AI, Farfront, Microsoft is one of them. The other, our big, good competitors are there as well. And we laid out some principles, and one of them is building that resilience and having that fund that we did with the OpenAI, you know, the 2 million for bringing literacy around this area, which I think is core. The other one is using technology and innovate to be in the forefront, to be able to detect this. And this is where I think I'm the little optimist, that I do think we're still, you know, I'm a slight optimist. We're still in the front there, trying our best to innovate what we can. But that requires also that we have that dialogue with defense, that, you know, that have the ongoing knowledge of what's going on as well, how we work together. So, and we got to also see, you know, each one of us, you touched upon it. I mean, 99% of all attacks can be prevented from simple hygiene, you know, cybersecurity hygiene, the baselines of updating your software, etc. So there are things we can do. When it comes to deep break, we talked about this as well. The literacy program, the vulnerable groups, protecting, every people around democracies, etc. And I'm sure you can also come up with some initiatives. You are a coming generation, and I saw gaming today. I love that part. I think that's very creative. Something that that can trigger people's curiosity to learn, and also take in a little bit the seriousness of protecting what we hold so dear, which is the fundamental part of our democracies, the election.
Yeah, don't want to reiterate everything that has been said. I just want to stress the same thing for that question. I think, of course, governments can build up structures in order to avoid these kind of issues. But again, I think it's going to be difficult, if not impossible, to avoid all kinds of disinformation or cyber attacks, which comes back to my previous point. I think really building resilience within our societies, within each and every individual of us, is really core also to that question.
I see a sort of orange, yellow, red lamp flashing, so I'm going to be super quick. Agree. I also think that I'm very proud that we are one of two, I think, countries in the entire world who has not a minister, myndighet, an agency for psychological defense, which I think could be a really good step in the right direction. And yeah, I will refer to them in the interest of time.
Yeah, so thank you so much for being able to fit so much fruitful information in such a short time. And still, I mean, we've discussed a lot of threats, but also a lot of opportunities. And I think a majority of us here in the panel are optimistic about the future. So at least that feels good to leave this panel with that feeling. So thank you so much. And yeah.
Thank you, Oscar and the panelists. What a great discussion on rising cyber threats and the ethical implications of AI. We should not forget about them, but also how it actually can facilitate humanitarian efforts. This concludes the first part of the NATO Youth Summit here in Stockholm, and we're about to hand over to our colleagues in Miami to continue the discussion online with the audiences on the other side of the Atlantic. For those of us that's here in Stockholm, stick around. We are continuing our program offline. And if you are following us on the live stream, don't worry, you'll be able to find a recording of our sessions this afternoon in Stockholm online. But before we do, we will be taking part in a very special session, a transatlantic dialogue with the NATO Secretary General, Jens Stoltenberg, who is connecting remotely from the NATO headquarters in Brussels, and who will link us up with Miami. Before we do that, we are going to do a little poll. So we're actually doing the poll from this morning to see if you have changed your minds about the biggest security challenge. So please, you all know how to do this now. Let's see what you all think. What is the biggest security challenge? Are we getting some results, maybe? Wow. I am not surprised. Coming out of these very interesting panels about the disinformation and also the rising cyber threats. Oh, okay. It's great to see that you are interacting with us today. Again, disinformation. Well, all of you here can help in fighting disinformation, and it's great that you're all here doing this today with us. Okay. Are we ready? Of course we are. We woke up ready, right? Are we live with Miami now, maybe? We are live with Miami. And I would like to greet Donna Franzén, who is on the other side of the Atlantic. Let's give them a round of applause. And hopefully... Hello, Donna, and good morning, Miami. It's great to hear you. We've had an exciting morning here with so many interesting discussions, ideas, and inputs. So with that, let me hand over to you in the US, and we'll remain on the line for the next session.
Thank you so much, Sarah. I know you had a very exciting and interactive program in Stockholm, and we are excited to continue the event here in Miami. The next session is a transatlantic dialogue with both locations hosted in Brussels. And I'd like to give the floor to Carlotta Rebello, who is at NATO HQ with the Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg, NATO's highest level official, which is very exciting. So Carlotta, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Donna, in Miami, and earlier Sarah in Stockholm. It is indeed an absolute pleasure to be here at the NATO HQ to conduct this transatlantic conversation with the Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg. Thank you very much for having me in your home. It's a pleasure. Before we begin, I would like to recognize the audience here with us at the Agora, comprised of young NATO staffers and interns. I'm sure they're very eager to hear your thoughts on the future of the alliance and the future of the world. So thank you and hello.
Thanks so much, Carlotta. It's great to be with you here in Brussels. And also hello to Sarah in Stockholm and Donna in Miami. And also told that in Miami, the president of Montenegro, Milatovic, is there together with you. And Montenegro was actually the first country I had the honor and pleasure to welcome in as a new NATO ally when I became Secretary General. They joined back in 2017. So it's great to be together with all of you and to be able to again engage with and talk with young people, not least then also to the first time to engage with Sweden, who is our newest member. We raised the Swedish flag outside the NATO headquarters not so many months ago, and it's good to have Sweden as a full member of the alliance.
Well, and it's been great to seeing it out there as well while here in Brussels. Well, let's look ahead to July. That's when NATO will hold its summit in Washington, and it will mark the 75th anniversary of the alliance, but also will address some of the very serious issues and challenges. So I'm curious to hear from you, what are some of the key threats faced by NATO allies, and what are we doing to solve them?
So NATO faces, of course, many threats and many security challenges. We live in a world with more great power competition, also with China. But we have, on top of that, of course, a new war in the Middle East, and we have a full-fledged war in Europe with a brutal war aggression launched by President Putin against Ukraine. And all of this matters for our security. No one can tell with certainty what the next war, the next crisis, the next threat will be. But what I can say is that as long as we stand together, North America and Europe, and protect each other, we will be safe, we will be secure. Because together, NATO allies represent 50% of the world's economic might and 50% of the world's military might. So as long as we stand together, we will be able to handle any potential threat and challenge against our security.
Well, I want to turn to the question of, an increased defense spending, because at a time when there are so many challenges around the globe, and this can go, from health to education to climate crisis, why should governments be spending taxpayers' money on, more tanks and bombs? So why this conversation about the increase in defense spending?
Because without peace, without security, we will not manage to cope with any of the other big challenges we face, be it global warming, climate change, or alleviating poverty, or making social and economic progress. All of that will be impossible if we are not able to preserve peace, to preserve security for the 1 billion people that live in NATO countries. I have been Minister of Finance, I've been Prime Minister for 10 years, I've been in different political positions over many years, and I really understand that it's hard to find money for defense, because all politicians always, and I've been among them, would like to spend money on health, on education, on climate change, on all the other important tasks. But the reality is that unless we succeed when it comes to security, we will not succeed with the other tasks. And when the Cold War ended, after the Berlin Wall came down and the Cold War ended, NATO allies, also my own country, Norway, we all reduced defense spending for many, many years when tensions went down. But when we reduced defense spending when tensions went down, we have to be able to increase the defense spending and once again invest in defense when tensions are going up as they do now. And the last thing I will say about defense spending is that we have done it before. Also, as late as the beginning of the 1990s, at least the end of the 1980s, NATO allies in Europe and Canada, we spent roughly 3% of GDP on defense, which is significantly more than we spend today, because then we lived in a more dangerous world and then we invested more in our security.
Well, I think we should open the floor to questions. We'll get started in Miami, where I know Donna is standing by, and we have a couple of questions for the Secretary General.
Yes, thank you so much, Carlota, and it is a great honor to the Secretary General. We have asked one member of the Aspen Youth Council and one of the winners of the Youth Summit Challenge to address a question. So Vijay and Kissa, I'd love for you to come to the stage. Please introduce yourselves. We can grab that microphone. You can come on up and both come on at the same time. And you will introduce yourselves with your name, the country you're from, and then your question.
Okay. All right. Good morning, Miami, and good afternoon, Sweden. Thank you so much for having us. My name's Kissa Jaffrey. I'm part of the Youth Council Summit. And I'm originally from Pakistan, but I've lived in Chicago for a couple of years now. General, thank you so much for your time and sharing your knowledge with us and answering some critical questions that we have. And one from me is, with emerging technology shaping the future of warfare, how is NATO going to be responsive, adaptive, as well as ethical during these changes? Thank you so much.
Thank you. And you can pass the microphone on to Vijay. Vijay, you may do the same.
Hi, so my name is Vijay. I'm a senior at Yale and from Luxembourg. Thank you so much for taking my question today. My question is about NATO strengthening relations with countries outside of the alliance, like Australia and Japan. What is NATO's mission in fostering those relationships? And how do you respond to questions about NATO potentially overexposing itself, specifically in regions that intersect with China's sphere of interest?
Thank you both for your smart, thoughtful questions. Carlota, back to you.
Thank you. Well, let's begin with the first question about, emerging technology and how it is shaping warfare. I'll let you tackle that one first.
Well, emerging disruptive technologies are changing the nature of warfare as much as the Industrial Revolution did a couple of centuries ago, because we see it also in Ukraine, how cyber, how drones, how autonomous systems are playing a very major role in the warfare in Ukraine. There's this paradox that you have trench warfare, which reminds us of the First World War, and then we have very advanced technologies applied to this kind of classical warfare. NATO has been and continues to be the strongest and most successful alliance in history for many reasons, but one of the reasons is that we have always been able to keep a technological edge on our potential adversaries. And we just need to make sure that we maintain that technological edge. We do that by now investing more in technology. We have established a new fund, innovation fund. We have also established a network of centers for developing technology across the alliance. And all of this we do to partly ensure that NATO as an alliance, but also allies as allies, ensure that they invest in new disruptive technologies, which are very linked to also military capabilities. Artificial intelligence, quantum computing, of course, it matters really for how weapons and weapon systems will be applied and developed today and in the future. We also need ethical guidelines. We're working on that for NATO allies. But most of all, we need to ensure that not only NATO allies, but also our potential adversaries have a minimum of ethical guidelines when they now implement all these different technologies in their weapon systems. Then on our partnership outside NATO, we have many partners. We have close to 40 partner nations around the globe. But the question was primarily about our partners in the Indo-Pacific. We have 4 partners there: Japan, South Korea, Australia, and New Zealand. These are important partners for NATO. NATO is a regional alliance, North America and Europe, and NATO will remain a regional alliance. Article 5 of our collective defense clause will apply for NATO allies, Europe and North America. But this region, the North Atlantic region, faces global threats. Cyber is a global threat. Space, which becomes more and more important for defense, is a global challenge, of course. But also, for instance, China. It's not about moving NATO to the Indo-Pacific, but it's about that China and global threats are coming closer to us. We see China in cyberspace, we see them in Africa, we see them in the Arctic, we see them trying to control critical infrastructure in our own countries. So all of this matters for our security. In many ways, the war in Ukraine demonstrates that security is not regional, security is global. The main country that is enabling Russia to conduct its war of aggression against Ukraine in Europe is China. They are by far the biggest trading partner for Russia. They are delivering critical components to their weapons, electronics, advanced technology, which is enabling Russia to build missiles, drones, a lot of other stuff, which is key for their war against Ukraine. And then we have Iran, and then we have providing drones. We have North Korea providing ammunitions and weapons. So the Asia, the friends of Russia in Asia, Iran, North Korea and China, they are key for Russia's capability to fight against a European friend, neighbor of NATO. So this idea that we can divide Asia from Europe doesn't work anymore. This is interlinked. Therefore, we also, of course, need to address the security challenges that China is representing for our security.
Well, let's turn to the newest member of the alliance, where Sarah is standing by in Stockholm with 2 more questions for the Secretary General.
Thank you, Carlotta, and thank you for your time, Mr. Stoltenberg. We have 2 young participants here in the room. We have an international participant who also competed in the NATO Youth Challenge, and we also have a Swedish participant asking each a question. Please introduce yourselves, tell us which country you're from, and ask your question.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary General, my colleagues from Stockholm and also Miami. I'm Bartosz Mościcki, President of Polish Forum of Young Diplomats from Poland. I would like to ask about what should be the role of the alliance of NATO in the reconstruction process in Ukraine after the war ends. Last but not least, thank you for the years of your service for the alliance. Thank you.
Hello everyone, my name is Amita Valle and I'm a political science student at the Swedish Defence University from Stockholm, Sweden. I want to thank the organizers today for doing all of this. It's very nice that the youth get a place to ask their questions. And I also want to thank the Secretary General for answering our questions. The debate surrounding Sweden and Finland's entry in NATO have been characterized by how been characterized by how the organization will contribute, or how the countries will contribute to the organization. But my question is, how will the NATO membership contribute to these countries? Thank you.
Well, first, on the question about NATO's role in reconstruction of Ukraine after the war. The first thing I will say is that, first of all, we need to ensure that Ukraine prevails. Because unless Ukraine prevails, there's nothing to reconstruct in the free and independent Ukraine. So the most immediate, the most important task now is to help Ukraine with military support, as NATO allies and NATO do. We need to sustain that. We need to make the support more predictable and more robust. And we are going to hopefully make decisions on that, not least at the NATO summit in July. So yes, reconstruction in the future is important, but unless Ukraine prevails, there is nothing to reconstruct. And second, the reconstruction will be very expensive. But prevention is cheaper than in a way repairing. So meaning that every air defense missile we can provide to Ukraine will actually mean less damage, less destruction, and then also less need for reconstruction after the war. So
does it go back to that notion of the increased defense spending then?
Yeah, absolutely. But the thing is that we must afford, we must be able to help Ukraine prevail, because it's important for Ukrainians, but also because every day this war drags on. Of course, the more destruction and the more expensive, the more resource demanding it will be to do reconstruction afterwards. So I'm not saying that we should not think about reconstruction, but the precondition for reconstruction is to prevail, and the sooner Ukraine can prevail, the sooner this war can end with a just and lasting peace where Ukraine prevails as a sovereign independent nation in Europe, the less need there will be for costly reconstruction afterwards. Then on the issue of reconstruction, of course NATO will play a key role in rebuilding defense and security institutions. We will play a key role in also helping them to not only reconstruct their own country, but become a full-fledged member of the alliance. We decided in Vilnius at the summit last summer that Ukraine will become a member of NATO. We also made 3 important decisions to move them closer to NATO membership. We turned the whole process from a 2-step process to a 1-step process. We removed something called the Membership Action Plan. So meaning that Ukraine doesn't have to go through a Membership Action Plan. They can go straight from where they are now and be invited as a full-fledged member. So then we shorten down the process. Second, we established something called the NATO-Ukraine Council, which is an important political body where we actually strengthen our political integration and cooperation with Ukraine, and also make it easier for them to join the alliance at a later stage. And thirdly, we agreed a big program for interoperability, and interoperability is a difficult word for ensuring that Ukraine and NATO allies can work together on communications, on operations, on everything. And this program will help them now, but to help them also in the future to build a future force which is fully interoperable, that can fully be integrated with NATO forces. So these are the things we have to do, both in the short and the long term, ensure Ukraine prevails and help them to rebuild the country afterwards.
Well, let's tackle the other question then, which was about, the other side of membership. What can NATO membership do to the newest members of the alliances? Yes.
Yeah, well, first of all, NATO provides security guarantees. And that's the best security guarantee that ever has exist. That's Article 5 of the Washington Treaty, saying that an attack on one ally, it will be regarded as an attack on all allies. So if you attack Sweden, or you attack Finland, or Norway, or Belgium, or whatever NATO ally, then it will be regarded as an attack on 32 allies. And again, we are by far the strongest military power in the world, 50% of the world's military might. So as long as we stand together, as long as we ensure that it's no room for misunderstanding in Moscow or in any other capital that may be an adversary to NATO, there will be no military attack against any NATO ally, and that includes also Finland and Sweden, because they realize that an attack on one ally is an attack on all allies. So the first and most important thing that Finland and Sweden gets is Article 5, is NATO's collective defense clause, collective defense security guarantees. Then, of course, they get the opportunity to sit here at the NATO headquarters, to be fully part of this family, to sit at the council meetings just inside the meeting room over there, and be equal around the table and take decisions, and be integrated in our political, our practical, our military cooperation. That's good for Finland and Sweden, but it's also, of course, good for NATO, because Finland and Sweden brings a lot to NATO. So this is good for NATO, good for Finland and Sweden, and good for peace.
Well, it would be remiss if we didn't turn to the audience here with us in Brussels. There is time for a few questions. So if anyone has a question for the Secretary General, could you put your hands up? Okay, I can see two here. 1, 2, and if we could follow the same format, could you introduce yourself, say where you're from, and we'll have the questions back to back, please.
Hello everyone in Miami and Stockholm, and good afternoon, sir. My name is Cornelia, I'm from Hungary, and my question would be, over the past 10 years of being Secretary General of NATO, what do you think was the biggest challenge, and on the other hand, the biggest accomplishment of the organization?
Thank you. And second question, please.
Yes, hello. My name is Tatum Brunton from Canada. My question for you is, did you always want to work in this field? And do you have any advice on youth professional career paths? Thank you.
Thank you. Quite nice that we got a bit more personal here in Brussels.
So first, on the biggest challenge. The biggest challenge is and has been the war in Ukraine. Because all the other challenges I have faced has, of course, been very serious, but they have not had the same magnitude and not the same implications for NATO security and for peace in our region as the full-fledged war in Ukraine. And I say full-fledged war on purpose because when I arrived in October 2014, Russia has already annexed Crimea, and they have already taken part of eastern Ukraine, or used their forces to control the eastern part of Ukraine. So the war in Ukraine didn't start in 2022 in February, it started back in 2014. But of course the full-fledged war invasion in 2022 really changed everything and has been by far the biggest and most serious challenge I have faced as Secretary General. Then the good news is that I've seen how allies have stepped up, how we have mobilized and provided unprecedented support to Ukraine. And also, I'm absolutely certain that President Putin totally underestimated the Ukrainians, their bravery, their determination to fight and protect their country. You have to remember that at the beginning of the war, most experts feared or believed that Ukraine would fall within weeks, Kiev within days. That didn't happen. The Ukrainians have been able to liberate 50% of the territory that Russia occupied in the beginning of the war. They have been able to inflict heavy losses on the Russian occupiers, and they have been able to open the corridor in the Black Sea, enabling them to export grains and other products. So these are big victories for Ukrainians, showing that they have the determination, the bravery to really fight back. But Putin also underestimated NATO. And the unprecedented support we have been able to deliver to Ukraine. So this has been my biggest challenge. Then the other question was
about if you always wanted to work in this field, and any advice for young professionals.
First of all, my plan was never to become a politician. That was the beginning. So I was a young politician when I was in my a teenager in the beginning of my 20s. Then I was active in the Social Democratic Party of Norway. But then I decided to leave politics and to become an economist, to do statistics and mathematics. So I started to do a PhD at the Central Bureau of Statistics in Norway. And my plan was to never engage in this kind of dirty business of politics, because I wanted some true, pure and, serious stuff science. But then I was asked to become Deputy Minister for Environment in 1990. and I promised myself and my wife want to do that for a year or two, and then I ended up here because I stayed in politics. And to be honest, politics is very exciting because you actually do something, you can change the world. Of course, not as fast and not as always in the direction you really want, but at least you're part of a process where things are changing and things are happening. And in democratic countries, of course, then you also have to face the voters. And I have lost elections, I have won elections, and I can tell it's better to win than to lose the elections. But you have to be able to do both and to live with both. And then my plan was to work also on the international scene. I worked mostly on climate change and also with a big campaign to immunize children, which is a very effective way to alleviate poverty. But then when I was asked by President Obama and Chancellor Merkel and the other leaders back in 2014 to become Secretary General of NATO, I thought it was impossible to say no. And of course, I don't regret for a second that I said yes, because it has been and is a privilege to serve at this great alliance with all these great people, with all these great nations. And also to have the honor of welcoming North Macedonia, Montenegro, but also Finland and Sweden as members, and to serve at a very critical time for our security. So I'm extremely privileged. I'm very happy that I had this opportunity, even though it has been a very challenging period, 2014 to 2024. But yeah, that has been a privilege.
So advice for young professionals is perhaps to not be scared to deviate from the plan.
The problem is that I never had a very clear path or a clear idea for what I should become, except for the one thing I didn't become. Because I had one clear plan, and that was to not become a politician and to become a professor in mathematics and statistics. That was my only clear decision in life, and I failed totally. So I think first of all, it is important to be devoted to what you do, a bit regardless of exactly what you do, and not think too much about the next job, but think more about the job you have. And not be too afraid of authorities and bosses. That's really serious, the last one. So be yourself and believe in yourself and be nice to all the people you work with, and then something nice will happen.
Well, I have one final question. I think this being the NATO Youth Summit, it is important to address, everyone watching us, of course, the audiences here in Brussels, in Stockholm, and in Miami, about, what parting words do you have to say for these young audiences about the future of our defense and security? Big question to end, yes.
We live in a more dangerous world, and we have to take that very seriously. At the same time, NATO is stronger and more united than we have been for decades. So as long as we ensure that we are united despite our differences, we are 32 countries from both sides of the Atlantic with different political parties in power, with disagreements on many issues, but we have always been able to unite around what is NATO's core task, and that is to protect and defend each other. NATO's purpose is not to fight the war, but NATO's purpose is to prevent the war, is to deter war, is to make sure that there is no room for misunderstanding, that we protect and defend each other. And by doing that, NATO has been able to preserve peace for NATO allies, 1 billion people, for 75 years. So, yes, there is a more dangerous world, but at the same time, this alliance has proven extremely resilient, extremely capable, and we are by far the most successful alliance in history for at least 2 reasons. One is that we have been united despite our differences. We see the value of standing together. And second, we have been able to change when the world is changing. So as long as we just keep this, what should I say, big and sometimes a bit strange family together, we will be safe. And then we can devote our time and our energy to climate change, to education, to science, to all the other, to arts, to all the other beautiful things. So just make sure that NATO is, as I say, strong and united, then we can devote time for other more beautiful activities.
NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg, thank you very much for your time today. I have no doubt that everyone watching us on both sides of the Atlantic found this to be a really inspiring conversation, which will hopefully pave the way for further debate and conversation about the future of the alliance. Thank you very much for your time.
Thanks.
Well, that concludes the Transatlantic conversation coming to you from the NATO HQ here in Brussels. The NATO Youth Summit will continue now with Donna in Miami. Thank you.
Thank you, Secretary General, for your insights and for showing all of us in the room and beyond that you can carve your own path. And thank you to Sarah and Carlota for helping facilitate this wonderful conversation. And thank you to all the thoughtful participants.